Hello friends, about of the friends who watch my videos are not subscribed, and I would be really happy if you do so. Also, don't forget to hit the like button and leave your comments. Your interaction makes the content reach everyone and contributes to the growth of the channel. Thank you. Back in September 2023, I, Miles Corbin, a simple high school history teacher, decided I needed a serious break from the grind. City life was suffocating me, and the mountains were calling. So, I packed my gear and headed for a remote spot in the Appalachians called Blackwood Ridge. The place was legendary for being untouched, a real slice of wilderness. The drive up was a beast, but totally worth it. Blackwood Ridge was everything I'd hoped for and more. But as soon as I rolled into my campsite, a weird feeling crept over me. Like I wasn't alone, even though I was miles from anyone. I was setting up my tent when this old-timer, Ben Hayes, ambled over. He lived in a cabin nearby, and despite looking like he was in his 70s, the guy had the energy of someone half his age. "What brings you out this far?" he asked, his Appalachian accent thick as molasses. "Just needed to get away from the city," I replied. Ben chuckled, a dry, raspy sound. "Well, you won't find much excitement out here." I laughed it off, but as he turned to leave, his smile vanished. "Just be careful," he said, his voice low and serious. "There's been stories about these woods." Then he just melted back into the trees, leaving me with a serious case of the creeps. That night, tucked into my sleeping bag, the forest sounds, crickets, rustling leaves, you name it, were my only company. I tried to shake off Ben's warning, but it lingered like a bad smell. Eventually, I drifted off, exhausted from the day's hike and setup. It must have been around midnight when I jerked awake. There was this scratching, scuffling noise outside my tent. My heart hammered in my chest. I fumbled for my flashlight, my hand shaking like a leaf. I didn't know what was out there, but those noises, they weren't natural. The beam of my flashlight cut through the darkness, and I caught a glimpse of something moving. Big, with a long, whip-like tail. It slithered into the shadows before I could get a good look. Panic clawed at my throat. My phone was useless, no service out here. I was totally cut off. The noises grew louder, closer. I tried to tell myself it was just a deer or a raccoon, but deep down I knew. Ben's warning echoed in my head. This was something else, something wrong. Suddenly, I saw it again, moving through a patch of trees, illuminated by the moonlight. It was like something out of a nightmare, part human, part something else. Its face was twisted, almost human but horribly distorted. Its limbs were scaly, ending in claws that ripped into the tree bark as it moved. I screamed, hoping anyone, would hear me. No reply. The creature was getting closer, its claws tearing up the ground. I was trapped. My best chance was to run, weaponless as I was. I burst out of my tent and bolted into the darkness, pure adrenaline coursing through me. I could hear it behind me, a terrifying mix of snarls and the sickening sound of claws on earth. I risked a glance back, shining my light at it. The creature recoiled with a screech, momentarily blinded. Light. It hated the light. I sprinted towards where I thought Ben's cabin was, my lungs burning. I found it and pounded on the door, yelling his name. He appeared, startled and confused, but one look at my face and he knew something was very wrong. "We need to call for help," he shouted, grabbing his jacket. Our phones were useless, but Ben remembered his satellite phone in his truck, parked at the entrance of the campground. We grabbed our flashlights and huddled together, a small circle of light against the encroaching darkness. We reached Ben's truck, and he fumbled for the satellite phone, his hands shaking almost as badly as mine. He dialed the authorities, his voice tight with urgency. We waited, our flashlights our only defense. The creature stalked us from the shadows, growling and hissing, but staying just out of reach of the light. Finally, the sound of sirens pierced the night. The creature, sensing the change, let out a final, furious roar and vanished back into the depths of the forest. The authorities arrived and took our statements. They told us about other reports, strange animal attacks in the area. They promised to investigate, to find whatever was out there. As we drove away, I couldn't stop thinking about those poor souls who hadn't been as lucky as us. What had they seen in their final moments? The aftermath was a blur. A specialized team was sent in to hunt the creature. They found it holed up in a cave system, confirming our observation about its aversion to light. They captured it, and scientists were baffled. It was a new species, a predator unlike anything they'd ever seen. They eventually named it after Ben, the old-timer who'd been instrumental in its capture. Life eventually went back to normal, or as normal as it could be. But I'll never forget that night at Blackwood Ridge. The terror, the creature, Ben's bravery. Without him, things could have ended very, very differently. Now, every time I'm out in the woods, or even just when the lights go out, I remember, and I shudder. It was the summer of 2016, and I needed a break from the crazy city life. So, I decided to hit the Appalachian Mountains for some hiking with a group of friends. My name is Leo Maxwell, but everyone just calls me Leo. We all met up at this out of the way spot near the little town of Keeling, Virginia. As we were trekking through the woods, we were swapping stories and cracking jokes, the usual. "Hey guys," I said, trying to catch my breath. "Did you hear about the three-legged dog that walked into a bar?" He said. "I'm looking for the man who shot my pa." The group groaned. It was a terrible pun, but hey, I tried. On our third day out in the wilderness, we took a break by a creek. That's when I saw it, a massive animal footprint, near the water's edge. It was weird, though, kind of distorted. It gave me the creeps, but it was also fascinating. I called over to my friend Marco. "Dude, you gotta check this out," I said. "Leo, are you serious?" Marco said, rolling his eyes. "We've got miles to cover. You're just messing with us." "No, for real," I insisted, pointing at the weird print. "Come look." Marco came over and checked it out. He chuckled nervously. "Weird, man. Must be Bigfoot or something. Let's keep moving." So, we continued our hike through the beautiful Appalachian scenery, but an uneasy feeling started to creep in. Those huge footprints seemed to be following us, no matter how deep into the woods we went. We tried to keep it light, telling stories about crazy college days, but we couldn't shake off that sense of dread. By dusk, we set up camp near some rocks. The tension was thick. We huddled around the campfire, trying to enjoy a game of cards against humanity to get our minds off things. We joked around and laughed a bit more, and eventually we all tried to get some sleep. I was drifting off when I felt the ground vibrate, just a little. My eyes snapped open, and that's when I saw it, a massive, freaky creature emerging from the trees. It was huge, casting long shadows in the moonlight. The thing was kind of human-shaped, but also super animalistic. It had these weird folds of leathery skin on its face, and sharp bones sticking out of its arms and legs, like bloody branches and roots. This was no ordinary animal. It was like something out of a nightmare. The monster let out a blood-curdling scream and charged at our campsite. Everyone started screaming, and chaos broke out. My friend Sarah got swiped by one of those bony arms, a nasty gash down her back. I was paralyzed with fear, but I knew I had to do something. I grabbed a hunting knife, thinking maybe I could fend off this terrifying predator. My other friends scattered, trying to hide among the trees to escape the creature's rampage. With the hunting knife in my hand, I took a deep breath and tried to steady myself. I knew calling for help was pointless. We had no cell service, and we were miles away from anywhere. I had to think fast, or this thing would tear us apart. In the chaos, my friend Jake managed to climb a tree, scared out of his mind. Sarah was on the ground, unable to move because of her injuries, and she was crying in pain. The creature roared again, this time even louder, and lunged at Sarah. Instinct took over. I threw the hunting knife at the creature. It hit the mark, embedding itself in one of its grotesque limbs. The thing actually reeled back like it was in pain. But I knew it wasn't enough. The others saw their chance. Two of them rushed to Sarah's side, while another grabbed a burning branch from the fire, a desperate attempt at self-defense. "We gotta distract it and get out of here," I yelled. Everyone nodded, too scared to speak. We started moving around, trying to draw its attention away from Sarah. Then my friend Emily had an idea. "Guys, there's a ledge nearby," she whispered. "If we can lure it towards the ledge, maybe we can get it to fall." It was a long shot, but we didn't have any other options. We agreed to try Emily's plan. We led the enraged beast towards a rocky cliff overlooking a deep ravine. As we got closer, Jake, who had managed to come down from the tree, started throwing rocks at it, anything to keep it distracted. Finally, we reached the edge of the cliff. We positioned ourselves on either side of it, acting like cornered prey on purpose. The creature charged at us one last time. With a final burst of adrenaline, we all dodged to the side at the last second. The creature couldn't stop in time. Its momentum carried it right over the edge. We heard its dying scream as it fell into the darkness below. We were safe, for now. Relief washed over us, but it was short-lived. We had to get Sarah help. Jake found a thick branch, and we made a makeshift stretcher with our jackets. We carried her through the woods, hoping to find someone, anyone. Luckily, the next day, we stumbled upon a group of hikers returning from their own trek deep within the mountains. They had a satellite phone and called for emergency help for Sarah. The rest of us, exhausted and terrified, stayed with her until help arrived. The nightmare was finally over. We don't talk much about that night. about that horrifying creature. But it's something we'll never forget. The days that followed were a blur of worry for Sarah and gratitude that we had made it out alive. We often think about those chilling moments in the forest, wondering about what that grotesque beast really was. But we're also grateful that we outsmarted it and survived. Our lives have definitely changed since that night in the Appalachian woods. Some friendships got stronger, while others drifted apart. It's hard to deal with something like that. But one thing's for sure, we appreciate every single day we're alive. We know there are terrifying things out there, lurking in places where people rarely go. That incident taught us to always be vigilant and to be prepared for anything. Because you never know when your life might take a turn into the terrifying unknown. It was a late weekend in September 2021. My friends and I decided to hit up the Appalachian Mountains for a spontaneous camping trip, a much-needed break from the soul-crushing grind of our work week. I'm Alex, your average Joe stuck in a 9-to-5 desk job. My crew consists of Ben, a financial consultant who can make you laugh until you cry with his endless supply of puns, and Chloe, a graphic designer who manages to find beauty in even the most messed up situations. We packed our gear, loaded up on enough food and supplies to survive a small apocalypse, and hit the road mid-morning. As we cruised into the mountains, we passed by Fleming Reservoir, famous for its killer sunsets. Small towns dotted our route, but they became fewer and farther between the deeper we went. The landscape turned rugged, the roads got narrower and steeper, and the views absolutely breathtaking. Ben, ever the comedian, started cracking jokes about running into some axe-wielding psycho hiding in the woods. We finally arrived at our spot, a secluded slice of heaven nestled deep in the forest, right beside a crystal-clear river. It was dusk by the time we set up camp, and since the place was pretty remote, we figured we were in for some peace and quiet. We scarfed down dinner around the campfire, swapping funny stories about our lives, when we started hearing some seriously weird noises coming from the woods. It was like a mix of animal howls, clicks, and snarls, enough to make your blood run cold. "What the hell is that?" Chloe asked, trying to sound brave but failing miserably. "Probably just a raccoon practicing his opera scales," Ben replied, smirking. We forced a laugh, but honestly, we were all freaked out. Later, we bundled up in our sleeping bags and drifted off. Then, in the middle of the night, I was jolted awake by a blood-curdling scream. It was Chloe. She was hunched over, gasping for air, her face contorted in terror. "Ben's gone," she sobbed. Panic seized us. We frantically searched everywhere, but there was no sign of him. No backpack, no flashlight, nothing. Why would he just vanish like that? As we were looking around, something massive moved in the darkness nearby. The moon gave us just enough light to make out this huge, animal-like creature with freakishly long limbs and a snout full of gnarly teeth. Its eyes gleamed with pure evil. Chloe let out another scream and yanked me away from the nightmare scene toward a dense thicket of trees. We were in full-blown panic mode, totally shell-shocked. "What about Ben?" "Our phones," I stammered, realizing we were screwed. "No reception." "No use," Chloe whispered, numb with fear. That thing was still stalking us, keeping pace even with its slow, deliberate movements. We had no clue how fast it could move, and we sure as hell didn't want to find out. We stumbled upon a cave entrance, and without a second thought, dove in, desperate to escape. As we went deeper, the noises from outside faded, but our terror didn't. Then we saw it, a pile of human remains scattered on the cave floor. The stench of death hit us like a punch to the gut. This thing had been hunting humans for a long time. We were standing there, paralyzed by horror. When it hit us was Ben among those bones. "We gotta keep moving," Chloe whispered, clutching my arm. We pressed on, careful not to make a sound, but every footstep echoed like a gunshot in the cavern. We reached a dead end, a steep drop into darkness. "We can't go any further," I muttered to Chloe. Despair washed over us. Then we heard it, heavy breathing above us. The creature had found us. We were trapped. It leaped down, landing between us and the only way out. It snarled, pacing back and forth, watching our every move. I held on to Chloe tightly, knowing this was it. Then, Chloe had an idea. "The flare gun," she whispered, rummaging through her backpack for her emergency kit she carries. Her hands were shaking, but she raised the flare gun and fired. A deafening bang, a bright flash, and the flare slammed right into the creature's face. It screamed in agony, reeling back from the pain and blinding light. Its horrible wails echoed through the cave as it retreated into the depths of its lair. We scrambled out of the cave and ran like hell, not stopping until we reached our campsite. Gasping for air, we grabbed our backpacks and bolted. As we fled down the mountain, the creature's howls faded into the distance. Relief and terror mixed inside us. We'd escaped, but at what cost? Ben was still missing, and who knew how many others had fallen victim to that monster. We made it back to civilization and went straight to the cops, telling them everything. At first they were skeptical, but our terrified, messed up appearance convinced them. They sent a search party to find Ben and check out the cave, but they found nothing. No Ben, no cave, nothing. Days turned into weeks, and still no news. The forest held a dark dread for us as investigators kept searching. Chloe and I returned home, thanking our lucky stars we were alive. But every so often, I still think about Ben, imagining his fate. From that day on, we swore off camping in secluded forests. I can't even walk through the woods now without my heart racing, hearing those awful howls echo in my mind. It was March 2006. Me, Ben Holloway, your average accountant from the burbs, decided I needed a serious dose of adventure. So, I rounded up my buddies for a hiking trip deep into the Appalachian Mountains. There was Ethan Cole, an electrician with a dry wit that could cut through steel. Olivia, Liv Hayes, a small-town teacher with a camera permanently attached to her hand. And Marcus, Taz O'Reilly, a graphic designer covered in more ink than a comic book. We clicked instantly, like we'd known each other forever. First night, around the campfire, we're swapping stories, laughing, just soaking it all in. As the days wore on and we hiked deeper into the mountains, things got colder, darker, more intense. We found this isolated glen, nestled between these crazy steep ridges. We knew nothing about the place, but decided it was the perfect spot to make our base camp. It was a cool place, and we were really digging the feeling of having it all to ourselves. One night, we're huddled around the fire, choking down some truly awful dehydrated chicken and potatoes, and Liv cracks a joke so bad it was good. We're all cracking up when suddenly it hits us. It's dead silent. No crickets, no birds, not even the wind. Like Mother Nature herself was holding her breath. Guess the bugs got tired of Liv's jokes too. Ethan deadpans. We all kinda laughed. But a nervous energy had crept in, and none of us wanted to be the first to really acknowledge it. Next morning, Taz spots these weird animal tracks near our campsite. They were muddy, elongated footprints with claw marks, and unlike anything we'd ever seen. Maybe it's some local wildlife we don't know about, I offered, trying to sound more confident than I felt. Days turned into a blur of foggy valleys and endless trails, and the mood started to shift. We were still joking, but it was that gallows humor you use when you're trying not to freak out. One afternoon, we're soaked to the bone from a surprise downpour, and I just snapped. Maybe we should have followed those freaky footprints. I yell, my voice way higher than usual. Ethan, ever the comedian, pipes up. Remember Ben's law. Don't chase after strange things that could kill you. Solid rule, if you ask me. We all forced a chuckle, but the tension was thicker than the fog around us. That night, huddled around another fire, trying to dry off, we hear a twig snap. We all freeze, eyes darting towards the sound, but there's nothing there. It's probably just an animal, Liv says, but her voice wavers a little. We kept seeing those tracks over the next few days. It was unsettling. Then, one morning, things went from bad to worse. I was hiking solo on this abandoned trail, and I stumbled upon a campsite that looked like it had been through a war zone. Tents ripped to shreds, gear smashed, and these deep claw marks gouged into the trees. It was like something had gone absolutely berserk. I booked it back to camp and told the others. We all went to check it out, and even Ethan was speechless. This place looks like it was shredded by some giant creature, he mutters, his usual humor nowhere to be found. We all knew without saying it that we needed to be way more careful. The rain came back with a vengeance, and we're all crammed in our flimsy tent, listening to Taz's theory about how we're attracting storms because we're so unprepared. We were on edge, spooked by what I'd found. That night's sleep was a joke. I finally drifted off, only to be jolted awake by this blood-curdling scream. It was Liv. My heart was hammering in my chest as I scrambled out of my tent. Liv was standing there, frozen, pointing at something just beyond the firelight. And then I saw it. This thing. It was huge, towering over 8 feet tall, covered in matted fur with these long, sinewy limbs that ended in wicked claws. It was just standing there, watching us. It was watching. Liv stammered, her eyes wide with terror. I stared at the creature, my blood running cold. It was like something out of a nightmare. We all saw it. There was no denying it. This thing was real, and it was terrifying. We needed to get out of there and call for help. But we were in the middle of nowhere, and our phones were useless. We packed up faster than I thought humanly possible and started hauling it towards civilization. Every step of the way, it felt like we were being watched, hunted. At one point, Taz tripped and twisted his ankle really badly. Ethan, bless his heart, basically carried him the rest of the way. We finally stumbled into this tiny town and went straight to the police. They listened to our story, but you could tell they thought we were crazy. We described the creature as best we could: long arms, powerful legs, huge claws that could rip through anything. Its eyes seemed to glow. We told them how it made us feel. This primal fear. They were skeptical, but they agreed to send an officer back with us to check out the campsite. Back at the destroyed campsite, the officer took one look at those claw marks and his face went pale. "This is unlike anything I've ever seen," he said, snapping photos. He called for backup, told us to stay put in town until they figured out what was going on. We spent 4 days in this crappy little motel, while more officers arrived, along with some wildlife experts from a nearby university. They combed the forest, looking for our creature, but found nothing. They interviewed us a bunch of times, asking about the creature's behavior. Was it eating? Was it protecting something? We didn't know. It was all so confusing and messed up. A week later, they held a town meeting. They said the claw marks were similar to a known species of aggressive bear. They figured the creature we saw was just an unusually large, territorial bear. It didn't really make sense, not after what we saw. But what could we do? We didn't have any proof. We went home defeated, the awesome adventure we'd planned totally ruined. We said our goodbyes, knowing that none of us would ever forget what happened out there. Years have passed, but those memories are still crystal clear. Sometimes, on dark nights, when the shadows seem a little too deep, I can't help but wonder if that thing is still out there, lurking in the woods, waiting for its next encounter with some unsuspecting campers. And a shiver runs down my spine. The world is a lot more terrifying than we like to believe. I'm Barry Johnson, your average city guy, completely fed up with the rat race. I decided, screw it. I need some peace and quiet. That's how I ended up in a cabin in the middle of nowhere, smack dab in the Appalachian Mountains. I'm talking about a place so remote, it's not even on most maps, somewhere in the Spruce Knob, Seneca Rocks National Recreation Area in West Virginia. Think trees, mountains, and not much else. Bliss, right? About 2 weeks into my new life as a hermit, I got a surprise visitor. Turns out, one of my letters got lost, and the actual postman, Reggie Pearson, drove all the way out there to deliver it personally. I mean, talk about dedication to your job. We got to chatting, and he was nice enough to introduce me to some of the locals. One of them was this kooky old lady, Martha Jenkins, who swore up and down she'd almost been snatched by some kind of monster in the woods. The other folks just rolled their eyes and said she was full of it, but Martha wasn't backing down. Mid-September, fast forward to a gloomy afternoon in September. I'm hiking in the woods behind my cabin, enjoying the solitude, when I see something that makes my blood run cold. A bunch of trees are just shredded, bark ripped off, deep gashes in the wood, like something huge and angry went to town on them. The ground's all messed up too, with torn up leaves and bits of what looked like cloth. Right then and there, I started thinking maybe old Martha wasn't so crazy after all. For the next few weeks, I kept exploring, but now I'm jumpy. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig had me spinning around, expecting to see some creature from a horror movie. October, one Saturday. I'm walking along this path, and I get this super creepy feeling like I'm being watched. You know that feeling, right? Like the hairs on the back of your neck stand up. I stop dead in my tracks listening. My heart's pounding like a drum. And then I hear it. This ungodly screech. It sounded like something straight out of a nightmare. I'd been there long enough to know that wasn't a sound made by any regular animal. I panicked, picturing some enormous beast charging at me, just like Martha described. I wanted to run, to bolt like an Olympic sprinter. But a little voice in my head said, "Dude, if this is a predator, running is the worst thing you can do." So I froze, and after a minute, I realized the sound was actually pretty far away. Then a voice, "You who, Barry?" It was just Mrs. Gable, the lady from down the road who sometimes brings me my mail. We ended up having this awkward conversation about her new casserole recipe while I'm still freaking out on the inside. But she seemed to understand I wasn't in a talkative mood. After that, I was a wreck. Every little noise made me jump out of my skin. I couldn't sleep. I'd just pace around my creaky cabin all night, feeling like something was out there, waiting. A few days later, the main event, it's getting dark, and I'm walking this path down to the river, a path I'd never taken before. It's all misty and spooky, with these thick rhododendron bushes everywhere. I sit down on a log, just trying to chill, but that feeling of being watched is back, stronger than ever. It's like whoever's watching me is messing with me, because all of a sudden, the river goes nuts. It was calm a second ago, and now it's like rapids, all churning and foaming. The wind picks up, and the trees start thrashing around. This is definitely not normal. Then, I hear it, a huge thump behind me. I can't bring myself to turn around. I'm too scared. The river is going crazy and there is a loud crash. This massive thing bursts out of the bushes. I've never seen anything like it. It's huge, covered in this dark, matted fur, and it's walking on two legs like a person, but it's all wrong. Its arms and legs are too long, and instead of hands, it has these huge, wicked claws. Its face. Oh man, its face. It had a long snout full of these razor-sharp teeth. I'm frozen, like a deer in headlights. This thing turns its head, looks right at me, and I swear its eyes are burning with hate. We just stare at each other for what feels like forever. My brain's screaming at me to do something, anything. Finally, I manage to yell for help, but I know it's useless. There's no one around for miles. The thing lunges, and that's when I finally snap out of it. I throw myself off the log, just as it swipes at me with those claws. I can feel them whiz past my face. I scramble up and start running like hell. This thing is chasing me, and it's fast. I'm dodging trees, tripping over roots, but it's right on my tail. Then, by some miracle, I stumble onto a road. I don't know where it came from, but I don't question it. I just run, faster than I ever thought possible. I can hear the thing behind me, but I don't dare look back. After a while, which felt like hours but was probably just minutes, I see headlights. Headlights. The creature, it's like it knew it was beat. It just stopped chasing me and vanished back into the woods. The car that saved me was this beat-up old pickup truck, driven by a farmer, Mr. Abernathy. He saw me running like a maniac, took one look at my face, and didn't even ask questions. He just opened the door, and I practically dove in. He drove me back to my cabin, thank God. The next morning I was still a total wreck. I called Mrs. Gable and told her I was leaving. I didn't tell her the whole story, only that I couldn't stay there anymore, but I think she got the idea. I packed up my stuff and got out of there. I still don't know what that thing was. Was it the monster Martha talked about? I don't know. But one thing's for sure is some things are better left unknown. I'm just glad to be alive, and I owe Mr. Abernathy my life. I'm not cut out for the wilderness life, that's for damn sure. I'm sticking to the city from now on, where the only monsters are the ones in suits. It was December 2016, when my life took a left turn, and I found myself facing nightmares in the Appalachian Mountains I never thought I was capable of. My name is Alex Riley, and back then, I just wrapped up college. I figured a solo hiking trip was just what the doctor ordered to clear my head before diving into the soul-crushing world of job hunting and bills. My journey dropped me into some wild, untouched corner of the Appalachian Mountains. The air was crisp and clean, and the quiet was exactly the kind of peace I was looking for. The scenery was insane, with trees towering over me like Mother Nature's own skyscrapers, and the soft hum of wildlife buzzing through the chilly mountain air. I pushed deeper into the woods, stitching the marked trails for a beat-up old cabin tucked between two massive oaks. Its blue paint was peeling, showing off the dark, weathered wood underneath. It had definitely seen better days. A weird curiosity tugged me towards the place. As I got closer, a nasty, rotten smell hit me. Then I spotted strange marks on the old wood, gashes that looked like something alive made them, but nothing human. A shiver ran down my spine as it hit me, claw marks. My brain was going a mile a minute, fear replacing curiosity. Something dangerous was around here. Even though half my brain was screaming danger, another part was weirdly whispering, "This is kind of cool, but definitely not Disneyland." "He there, buddy," a rough voice called out. A haggard-looking guy appeared from behind a nearby tree. He introduced himself as Jake Morgan, a hunter who'd been living in these mountains for years. Jake started talking about some creature that roamed these parts, the thing that made those marks on the cabin and was behind a bunch of missing hikers like me. It sounded like seriously bad news, but I needed a place to crash. He offered to let me stay the night. He said the creature had never attacked his cabin before. As the sun dipped behind the mountains, casting creepy shadows across the forest floor, the tension was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Jake and I were holed up in his cabin, sharing a dinner of beans and whatever canned stuff he had. The silence was broken every now and then by sounds from the darkness outside, rustling leaves or snapping twigs. Despite his rough look, Jake had a quick wit and a sense of humor that kind of put me at ease. At one point, he chuckled, I'm not sure if it's safer living alone in these woods or in some city full of folks running around like chickens without their heads." Later that night, as we huddled around a crackling fire, the vibe totally shifted. Weird growls echoed through the air, chilling us to the bone. Then, everything went dead quiet. The silence didn't last long. We heard heavy footsteps outside. Something big was making its way closer. Trying to keep his voice steady, but failing miserably, Jake muttered, "We gotta be ready for whatever's out there." The door burst open with the force of a freaking freight train. Standing there was this massive monster. It wasn't human, but it wasn't like any animal I'd ever seen. It was all muscle, with limbs ending in razor, sharp claws, and its yellow eyes burned like hot coals against its pale skin. I choked on my breath, seeing 2 rows of sharp teeth jutting out of its mouth. Teeth that could definitely rip through flesh like butter. Petrified, we watched as it started to charge. Jake's hands were shaking like crazy, but he somehow managed to grab his shotgun leaning against the wall, while I clutched a hunting knife I'd found earlier. Jake aimed the shotgun at the creature, his hands still trembling. I gripped my knife and braced for impact. The monster lunged, and with a baying, Jake fired. The thing let out a pained growl and stumbled back. We saw our chance and bolted for the cabin door, slamming it shut behind us. The creature's growls continued outside as we frantically barricaded the door with whatever furniture we could find. "Why haven't we called for help?" I asked, my voice strained and breathless. "No signal out here," Jake replied, his voice tight. "We're on our own." The creature clawed at the door, its monstrous strength making our makeshift barricade shudder. We scrambled to find something else to defend ourselves. Jake rummaged through his stuff and pulled out an old flare gun. "Maybe this will scare it off," he shouted over the deafening scratching and pounding. I nodded. Anything was worth a shot. We waited for a break in the beast's attack before cautiously opening the door. The creature was right there, just feet away, muscles tense, ready to pounce. Jake fired the flare gun directly at it. The thing was engulfed in bright red flames, roaring in agony, and it retreated back into the dark forest, leaving a trail of smoking footprints. We didn't waste any time getting the hell out of that cabin. Grabbing our essential gear, we took off running as fast as our legs would carry us, hoping to put as much distance as possible between us and that nightmare. As morning broke, we finally saw familiar paths leading back to civilization. We were beyond exhausted, but fear pushed us to keep going. Once we reached a populated area, we contacted the local cops and told them everything. At first, they were skeptical, especially when we described our attacker. But after checking out the cabin and the surrounding area, they found enough evidence to suggest something messed up was indeed lurking in the woods. The investigation started right away. A few days passed, and despite being emotionally and physically wrecked, Jake and I stuck together. We talked to the media, shared our terrifying story, and warned others about the danger hiding in those woods. They never found the creature's body. People wondered if it survived or not. The authorities warned everyone to stay alert and avoid that part of the forest at all costs. Jake and I spent weeks recovering from that awful night. We'd lived through a real-life horror movie, surviving a beast that shouldn't even exist. It messed us up, big time. We couldn't forget those who'd encountered that ghastly creature before, leaving their families searching for answers and some kind of closure. The horrible moments we shared now bind Jake and me together in an unbreakable bond. With mixed emotions of gratitude and sorrow, we keep on living, while honoring the memories of those haunted by that terrible entity. The forest still looms eerily in our minds, a chilling reminder of an experience too horrifying for words. Though life goes on, the shadows cast by that night will forever remain etched into our souls. It was a cold November in 2019. My name is Miller, and I was chilling in my little cabin, tucked way back in the Appalachian Mountains. I was chuckling to myself about some corny joke I'd heard earlier that day. See, I'm a bit of an outdoorsy guy, so it wasn't a shocker when my buddies suggested we check out the mountains' fall colors and killer views. Little did we know, danger was lurking around, hidden by all that beauty. Our crew was me, Clara, and Ben, three old friends who were always up for an adventure and loved being out in nature. We picked this out of the way spot in the Appalachians for our little getaway. It seemed perfect for just kicking back, doing some hiking, and hanging out by the campfire. On our first day's hike, Clara noticed some weird marks on a few trees near our campsite. Each tree had these parallel claw marks dug deep into the bark. Maybe it was just a bunch of pine needles scraping against them, Clara suggested, but she didn't sound too sure. Nah, those are way too precise for that, Ben interjected, his eyes glued to the marks. I had to agree with Ben, but I didn't want to freak out over it. We weren't about to let some mystery scratches ruin our trip, so we just kept on going, enjoying the awesome scenery. We walked through these amazing landscapes, full of bright yellows, reds and oranges, all popping against the gray sky above. But then we stumbled on what looked like an abandoned shack. The weathered wood planks were barely hanging on, and the shingles were about to fall off. Of course, our curiosity got the best of us, so we decided to poke around inside this old, forgotten place. As soon as I pushed open the creaky door, this horrible smell hit us like a ton of bricks. We all started gagging, and someone yelled out, "What is that smell?" None of us had ever smelled anything that bad before. Our eyes were watering like crazy, but we could see the nasty smell was coming from something wrapped up in a rotting tarp. Ben, with his shaky hands, decided to lift a corner of the tarp, even though Clara was totally against it. Underneath, we found what was left of some poor animal that had been completely torn apart. I've seen my share of dead animals, but this was on another level. Muscles were ripped from the bones, and its limbs were twisted in ways that just weren't natural. Just when we thought things couldn't get any worse, a loud THUD echoed through the woods behind us. What was that? Clara cried out, her voice shaking with fear. Before any of us could answer, another loud crash came from deeper in the woods. It felt like something big was heading our way. We stood there, frozen, staring at the tree line when we saw it, this terrifying creature moving on all fours. It had long limbs with razor-sharp claws, and its fur was all messed up with patches missing. Its eyes were wild and scary, and they were locked on us. Paralyzed with fear, Ben managed to stammer, That thing. It's what did that to the animal in there. We knew right then we had to get out of there. If this creature had marked this area as its territory, we were in deep trouble. Our minds were racing, hearts pounding. We had to get out of there, fast. We grabbed our stuff and bolted for an open clearing where we figured we'd be less exposed. As we huddled together under these big oak branches that were thrashing around from the crazy wind that had picked up, panic started to set in. "All right," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Wind is spotty out here, so calling for help is our best bet." I tried to lighten the mood with a lame joke about the unpredictable old Appalachian mountains, but I was freaking out inside too. We ran through the woods, our hearts pounding like crazy. That thing was chasing us, crashing through the bushes and gaining on us fast. We pushed on, not daring to slow down, scared it would catch up. Suddenly, we saw a small cabin up ahead, its windows glowing with a faint light. In our panicked state, it looked like a lifesaver, a place where we might find some safety. We raced to the cabin and burst through the door, locking it behind us. Clara and Ben immediately started looking for a way to contact someone, anyone, who could help. But there were no phone lines or internet. I mean, at this point, even an old-school landline would have been great. We had no idea why we couldn't call for help. Maybe it was because we were so far out in the mountains, or maybe, somehow, this creature had messed with any way we could communicate. We were getting more desperate and scared by the minute. The creature was outside the window now, its freaky eyes watching us from the darkness. It didn't attack right away, just watched us as we panicked, trying to figure out what to do. Between the crashing sounds from outside, we could hear the faint sound of running water. It hit us. A nearby river might be our escape route, or at least it might slow the creature down. We knew we had to leave the cabin now. It took every ounce of courage we had to step back out into the night, but together we ran towards the sound of the water, hoping it would lead us to safety. Our mad dash led us to a steep, rocky bank above a roaring river. With nowhere else to go, we held hands tight and jumped into the freezing water. The cold hit us hard as we plunged into the river. We fought with all our might not to get swept away, pushing towards the opposite bank. When we finally climbed out, we saw the creature hadn't followed us. Maybe its weird limbs and twisted body made it hard for it to swim, or maybe it was just scared of the river that seemed to have saved us. We pulled ourselves together on the other side, soaking wet and exhausted, and took a moment to catch our breath. Then we took off again, running through the dark woods, trying to put as much distance as possible between us and that thing. For the next few days, we kept moving, always looking over our shoulders, terrified it was still after us. We barely slept. Every snap of a twig or rustle of leaves had us convinced the creature was back. Finally, we stumbled onto a dirt road that led us out of the dense forest and back to civilization. Those days were the most terrifying of our lives, but they brought Clara, Ben, and me closer than we ever thought possible. Our fight for survival against that unstoppable monster made our bond unbreakable. It's a bond that's still strong today. We don't talk much about those awful days in the woods anymore. Some things are just too horrible to think about, and time has a way of dulling the sharp edges of memories like that. But sometimes, when we happen to be together on a dark night with shadows all around, we can't help but look over our shoulders just in case. And through it all, there's this unspoken promise between Clara, Ben, and me. We will never, ever go back into those dark woods. We'll never face whatever evil was out there, hunting with such brutal fury. We may have escaped its clutches once, all banged up and terrified, but one thing's for sure, we wouldn't be so lucky a second time. It was April 2023, and I, Ethan, had been holed up in a rickety cabin on the edge of a backwoods Appalachian town for about 3 months. People usually just called me Eighth. I needed to escape the city grind to focus on my writing. One night, after polishing off a homemade meatloaf and a cheap beer, I decided a long walk was in order. My gut felt like a lead balloon, and my brain was fried from staring at my laptop all day. Plus, you know how it is, the best ideas always hit you when you're not even trying. So, I'm out there, strolling through the woods near my cabin, fueled by cheap beer and wishful thinking. Some paths opened up into these big, clear meadows, while others led deeper into the shadowy, thick woods. I was starting to feel beat, my lungs burning a little, when I saw something seriously weird. A bracelet made out of what looked like human teeth. Seriously, who makes something like that? What kind of messed up joke is this? Before I could even wrap my head around that freaky sight, these blood-curdling screams ripped through the air, not too far off. I'd heard about attacks around here lately, mostly farm animals getting mauled. Then this guy, Caleb, comes crashing out of the trees, covered in dirt and blood, gasping for air like he just run a marathon in a sauna. "Help, please. It's coming," he wheezed, practically collapsing into me. "What happened?" I asked, trying to hold him up, my heart starting to pound. He struggled to catch his breath, then choked out, I think it got those campers by the river." A chill shot down my spine. What got them? But before Caleb could answer, more screams echoed through the woods, along with this sickening crunching sound, like bones snapping. That was all it took. We both took off like bats out of hell, branches and twigs whipping us in the face. We had no idea where we were going, just running from those horrific grunts, snarls, and the sound of tearing. Something. Caleb doubled over, clutching his side, tears streaming down his face. We ended up in this creepy clearing, full of dead trees that looked like they were reaching down to grab you. I spotted a piece of torn fabric snagged on a branch, definitely from the campers' stuff. Then I saw it. This thing. It was like something out of a nightmare. All twisted limbs and matted fur, tearing through the ground like it was nothing. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a drum solo. This monster was leaving these deep crimson streaks in the dirt as it charged toward us. Pure adrenaline kicked in and sent us into overdrive, sprinting towards this old, falling apart hut that looked like our only hope. Caleb stumbled ahead and practically threw himself through the hut's splintered door. I was right behind him, but my damn feet betrayed me, and I tripped, sprawling onto the ground just outside. For a second, everything went foggy, like I was looking through a tunnel. I thought, this is it. I'm done. Then the sheer terror of the situation snapped me back to reality. I scrambled to my feet as that thing lunged at the hut with terrifying speed. "Caleb," I shouted, hoping he could hear me above the creature's growls. "Brace yourself." I dove into the hut just as the creature slammed into it, its guttural snarls filling the tiny space. We were trapped, but we knew staying quiet and still was our only shot. This monstrous thing circled outside, clawing at the ground, its gross, matted fur brushing against the walls. And let me tell you, that fur was streaked with fresh blood. Huddled in a corner, Caleb and I exchanged this look, a silent agreement to just stay put. We didn't have any other choice. Panic was gnawing at us. Our chances of getting out of this alive felt slimmer than a supermodel on a juice cleanse. But even with that dread hanging over us, neither of us dared to yell for help. That would just be like ringing the dinner bell for whatever fresh hell had been unleashed on these woods. The creature stalked around the hut a few more times, then it seemed to lose interest. Or maybe it just figured it couldn't get in. It started moving away. We listened, barely breathing, to its fading grunts and snarls, relief starting to wash over us. Maybe we sighed too loud or shifted our weight, because the next thing we knew, that thing was charging back at the hut with an ear-splitting screech. Adrenaline surged through our veins again. We frantically searched for anything at all, that we could use to defend ourselves or block the entrance, but it was useless. Just moments after it took off, the beast slammed into our pathetic barricade, shattering it like cheap glass and leaving us completely exposed. We stared into its twisted face, its eyes like black pits, and I swear I knew those might be the last moments of our lives. Then, with a surge of desperate courage, I yelled to Caleb to follow me through a hole in the back of the hut. Terror gave us a burst of speed, but we could hear that enraged creature tearing the hut apart right behind us. Branches whipped our faces again as we sprinted through the woods, this time with a renewed determination to get out of there alive. It felt like the darkness itself was closing in, a prison filled with unimaginable horrors and no escape. In our panicked flight, we stumbled onto a steep bank leading down to a narrow creek. It was our only way out. Without hesitating, Caleb and I plunged into the icy water and swam across as fast as we could, never taking our eyes off the shore, where that thing was sure to follow. Our splashes and gasps for air seemed barely loud enough to cover its snarls and frustrated screams. We reached the other side, scrambling up the bank, desperately looking for any sign of help. Then we saw them headlights in the distance. Relief flooded through me, so strong I almost collapsed. Those lights meant a chance at survival, but also a way to warn others about the unspeakable horror that had been unleashed on those unsuspecting campers. Caleb and I managed to flag down the approaching vehicle. Turns out it was a couple of locals, Hank and Jeb, who were out searching for their missing friend. When they heard our insane story, their faces went pale, but they didn't hesitate. They grabbed their rifles, hunting rifles, I guess, and told us to get in the truck. Even though we got out of there alive that night, it felt like we were carrying this huge weight on our shoulders. We knew we could never really forget what happened. It would haunt us every time we closed our eyes or heard a rustle in the woods, and the thought of other innocent people coming face to face with that thing, it was gut-wrenching. We had to make sure their stories didn't end up like those poor campers. I glanced back at the dark forest one last time before the truck sped away, desperate to leave that nightmare behind. I knew our fight wasn't over yet. We had to make sure no one else would ever encounter that monstrous creature. That was something Caleb and I swore to each other as the night swallowed us whole. No one would ever be at its mercy again. It was October 2009, and after a brutal month at work, I was beyond ready for a break. I headed for the Appalachian Mountains, craving some serious R&R. The leaves were on fire. Reds, yelloranges, the whole shebang. I was going solo on this trip, just me, myself, and I. Time to ditch the daily grind and get back to nature. I found this perfect little spot just outside of Roanoke, Virginia. Seriously isolated, which was exactly what I was looking for. The cabin was nothing fancy, a quaint little place with basic amenities and cozy interiors. But it was perfect. Being on my own, no problem. I love my own company. The first few days were amazing. Think long walks in the woods, chilling by the creek in the afternoons, and kicking back by the fire at night. On day 3, as I was heading back to the cabin, after watching the leaves do their thing, I stumbled onto something that made my stomach drop. It was a campsite, or what was left of it. Tents were shredded, like some giant animal had used them as a chew toy. Gear was scattered everywhere, and there were these nasty bloodstains all over the ripped fabric of the tents. Anyone here?" I called out, feeling a little shaky. No answer. My brain tried to tell me it was just a bear, maybe a mountain lion, but something felt off. This was way too much destruction for any normal animal. It was getting dark fast, so I booked it back to my cabin, those messed up images playing on repeat in my head. I tried to wash them away with a few swigs from my flask, and eventually it worked, at least for a while. Day 4 rolled around, and that's when I heard it. Rex, my neighbor's dog, was barking his head off. My neighbor, a sweet old guy named George, lived about half a mile away. We'd bumped into each other earlier in the week, and he'd told me all about Rex. "He's a gentle giant," George had said. "Been with me for 10 years. Never a problem. Loves every critter, even the ones he should be scared of." At first, I ignored the barking, figured Rex was just having a moment, but it went on and on, all day long. My curiosity got the best of me. I had to check it out. The second I got to George's property, my blood ran cold. There was Rex, poor guy, laid out in the most gruesome way. It was horrifying. My hands started shaking, and I yelled for George, but just like before, no answer. It was like whatever did this had just vanished. Shaken to my core, I raced back to my cabin, double-checked every lock and window. That night, every little creak, every rustle outside, had me jumping out of my skin. I tried to ignore what sounded like a heavy thud by the front door, telling myself it was just a raccoon. But then, something made me go check. Big mistake. With my flashlight and hunting knife in hand, a safety first, right? I cracked open the door. And there it was, this massive wolf thing, standing maybe 10 feet away. Its eyes were black, almost human-like, and it was staring right at me, like it was sizing me up for dinner. The freakiest part was its legs. They were way too long and twisted at these impossible angles. This was no ordinary wolf. I wanted to scream, but I managed to just plaster myself against the wall, not wanting to make any sudden moves. This thing was huge, and it looked hungry. We had a stare down, and I knew I had to do something fast. I slammed the door shut and locked it, my heart pounding in my chest. The creature howled, this enraged, almost demonic sound, and started clawing at the door. That's when it hit me, I was screwed. No cell service, closest neighbor half a mile away, and I was trapped with this thing. It was a fight for survival, and I was totally unprepared. The howling got worse, and I started barricading the door with anything I could find. Chairs, a dresser, even the dining table. Every second felt like an hour, my mind racing, trying to figure out how my relaxing vacation had turned into a horror movie. Finally, after what felt like forever, the barricade was up. It wasn't much, but it was something. The wolf kept growling and scratching, testing the door every now and then, for what was probably several hours, before eventually dying down with the rise of the sun. I was terrified, exhausted but alive. When the sun finally came up, I peeked through the curtains. The coast seemed clear, but there were these huge claw marks all over the ground outside my door. With the sun shining, I felt a little braver and decided to make a run for George's place. He needed help, even though I knew in my heart that Rex was gone. I found George unconscious on the floor, with wounds that looked a lot like what happened to Rex. He was alive, but barely. We got out of there fast. We went straight to the nearest hospital and called the cops. We told them everything, the whole crazy story. They were just as baffled as we were. They sent a team to investigate my cabin, but they found nothing. George, after he recovered, decided to leave Rowan Oak for good. I couldn't blame him. I did the same not long after. The investigation went nowhere. No one could figure out what that thing was, or why it was there. Was it some kind of experiment gone wrong, a demon? Just some freak of nature? I guess we'll never know. George and I never spoke again after we parted ways. The shared trauma too much to bear, I suppose. Our lives took different paths, both of us trying to move on from that nightmare. The story of the Beast of Rowan Oak became a local legend whispered in hushed tones. But for me, it wasn't just a story. It was a nightmare I couldn't escape, a shadow that followed me everywhere. That chilling encounter and the loss of a good man and his loyal dog, it's a price I'll be paying for the rest of my life. Some things you just can't unsee. Some stories, they stick with you, whether you want them to or not. They become a part of you, a dark reminder of the horrors that lurk just beyond the edges of our everyday lives. It was mid-June 2021 when my cousin, Ben, and I planned a hiking trip through the Appalachian Mountains. We were both itching for some adventure, hoping to explore parts of the wilderness that not many people had seen. We decided to go way off the beaten path, leaving behind our boring, everyday lives and immersing ourselves in whatever nature had to offer. Ben and I had always been close, maybe even closer than some siblings. In our tight-knit family, we were known for our shared sense of humor and constant back and forth banter. "I bet you'll be begging me to save you from a chipmunk before this trip is over," I teased Ben, while he stuffed an insane number of granola bars into his backpack. Upon arriving at our chosen campsite, we were immediately struck by the captivating beauty around us. Ancient trees reaching for the sky, stones weathered by time's relentless hand, and the gentle murmur of a stream just beyond our sight. It all felt like something straight out of a fairy tale. On our second day in this remote area, we came across a gruesome sight, a mutilated deer hanging from one of the branches of a tall tree. This messed-up scene was odd for several reasons. First, predators in this area don't usually leave their kills out in the open like that. Plus, the way its body was twisted at such an unnatural angle sent chills up our spines. We debated whether it was best to head back to civilization and report this sick scene, or continue with our journey, hoping we wouldn't run into whatever, or whoever, might have done such a thing. Clearly driven by curiosity, we decided to venture further into the wilds. 4 days later, as we continued deeper into the woods, exploring new peaks and valleys, we stumbled upon an old, dilapidated cabin, half hidden behind overgrowth. Figuring it had been abandoned long ago, Ben and I cautiously approached it, curiosity winning out over fear. As we entered the cabin, we noticed long scratch marks engraved on the wooden walls. Their depth and position were unsettling and eerily unnatural. There was also a strong, pungent odor of rot coming from every corner. Suddenly, our entire story took an unexpected turn. Just as we stepped out of the cabin, we spotted an unnerving creature in the distance. At first glance, it appeared to be ripping debris off what seemed like a hunter's carcass. It was matted with blood and dirt. No animals native to this area were known to exhibit such unusual traits or gruesome behavior. Shaken by the sight, we urgently devised a plan to escape this increasingly sinister situation. Retracing our steps through the forest, it didn't take long for us to realize that this creature was following us. The unsettling crack of branches snapping in the distance haunted our every step. Recklessly evading capture by this often diminished distance adversary, our brisk walks swiftly gave way to a panicked run. Running for our lives while trying not to lose sight of each other was far from easy. As the tree line opened up ahead of us, we suddenly found ourselves face to face with the creature that had been stalking us. This hideous beast stood on 2 legs, about 8 feet tall. Its matted, fur-covered body reeked of death and decay, as if it had never known cleanliness in its unnatural life. The twisted snarl on its lips and the gleaming hunger in its eyes left no doubt in our minds that we stood before something truly evil, an abomination that belonged only in myth and legend. "This is it," yelled Ben as he reached into his backpack for his knife. "We need to take this thing down, otherwise we'll never get out of here." I grabbed Ben's arm. "Wait," I urged him. "We don't know what this thing is capable of. Let's not take any unnecessary risks." As he hesitated, the creature lunged toward us. Quickly, I pushed Ben out of its way, barely avoiding its attack. "Let's get out of here," Ben shouted, and we sprinted back towards the direction from which we came. As we ran, my cell phone chimed in my pocket. The sound startled me for a moment, but then I remembered that we had a signal since we were close to the edge of the forest. I yanked it out and frantically dialed 911. "Hello, we need help. In the forest near our location, there's a deadly creature following us." I tripped over my words as adrenaline pumped through my veins. The operator calmly requested more information, making it apparent that she struggled to believe our story. Nevertheless, she agreed to dispatch help immediately. "There's help on the way," I told Ben as we continued running. We had to buy time until help arrived. Despite our best efforts, the creature closed in on us with frightening ease. Knowing that it would only be a matter of time before it caught up to us entirely, it dawned on me that we needed another plan, one that didn't involve running blind and panicking. "Ben, you try to distract it while I find something we can use to defend ourselves." I instructed him as fast as I could manage. He nodded fearfully but bravely stepped forward, his arms raised cautiously while attempting to get the creature's attention. "Come and get me," he taunted desperately. While he struggled to hold the monster at bay, my gaze swept the area for a possible weapon, a heavy branch, or anything else sturdy enough to make a difference. The creature smiled menacingly at Ben, its massive teeth and deadly claws glinting in the dim light. But with each taunt, Ben bought valuable time. Finally, I found a suitable tree branch that had fallen to the ground. I gripped it tightly and approached the creature from behind. In that moment, I realized that I had to summon all of my courage to take action. I mustered every ounce of strength and swung the branch at the creature's head, connecting hard with a sickening crack. The monster staggered back in pain, disoriented and angry. "We need to run now," I ordered Ben as we bolted in the direction of what we believed to be safety. Minutes later, we could hear the sound of sirens in the distance, growing louder as they approached our location. Relief flooded through my body, hopeful that those sirens signified our rescue. We pressed on, despite our encroaching exhaustion. As the police officers arrived at our location, we warned them about the grotesque creature lurking nearby. Still panting heavily from our dramatic escape ordeal, we struggled to provide a coherent description of the beast, which left the officials skeptical but wary. The officers escorted us back to their squad cars before assembling a search party for any evidence of this bizarre encounter. After hours spent scouring the forest grounds, they found nothing but claw marks on trees, similar to those inside the cabin. With no tangible evidence or any further sightings of this malicious creature, and faced with mounds of paperwork ahead of them due to our pressing emergency call, officials ultimately decided to let us go home. Shaken but grateful for our lives, Ben and I vowed never to venture into that forest again. The chilling scratches on both the cabin walls and tree trunks would forever serve as haunting reminders of the unknown horrors lurking within depths best left untouched by curious onlookers such as ourselves. It was December 2016 when my life took a freaky turn. My name's Billy Tucker, and I was living in this isolated cabin near Franklin, West Virginia, deep in the Appalachian Mountains. I moved there to get my head straight after a messy breakup with my girlfriend of 5 years, Sarah. The peace and quiet of the place were amazing, you know. But man, those mosquitoes were killer. One evening, my neighbor, Old Man Hemlock, came knocking on my door looking like he'd seen a ghost. He was all red-faced and frantic. "Billy," he panted, "there's been a real bad wreck down by the creek." I followed him down there, and let me tell you, it was a sight. Tire tracks were swerving off the dirt road, and there was crushed vegetation everywhere, surrounding what was left of a beat-up sedan. The car was totaled, completely smashed up, with debris scattered all over the nearby trees like confetti after a messed-up party. It looked like something out of a movie, a real explosion. "This ain't no ordinary accident," I mumbled, trying to sound all calm, even though my stomach was doing flip-flops. "Should we call for help, you think?" Old Man Hemlock rubbed his chin. "Cell service is spotty round here, son, and judging from the looks of that," he gestured to the wreckage, "I doubt help would do much good." 2 days later, I was hiking in the woods behind my place, looking for firewood with another neighbor, Maggie Sue. We stumbled on something that made my skin crawl. There were these huge, deep scratch marks carved into a bunch of trees. I'm talking serious gogs. "I reckon we should get out of here," Maggie Sue said, her voice suddenly all shaky. "Don't ask me to explain it, just that we need to leave." "You know something about these marks?" I asked her, my curiosity getting the better of me. But she just gave me this tight-lipped smile, like she was keeping a big secret. As time went on, weird stuff kept happening around our little corner of Appalachia. People started saying they heard these creepy howls echoing through the valleys at night. Some even swore they saw something lurking up on the hills. This tall figure with long strides and freaky, glowing red eyes. Most folks chalked it up to hillbilly superstitions. But I couldn't shake this feeling that we were in deep trouble, despite trying to keep things light with my silly jokes. The fear started to really sink its teeth in, day by day. One freezing cold evening, I came home to find Old Man Hemlock on my porch, looking like he was about to have a heart attack. His face was whiter than a sheet. I saw it," he stammered. "I was out, enjoying some private time in the woods, when something jumped out at me from the trees. It had this body like a beast, but with arms, like a human's but with claws. Long, sharp claws, and its eyes." He started shaking uncontrollably, couldn't even finish his sentence. I rushed him inside, trying to calm him down and make sense of his ramblings. 3 nerve-wracking nights went by, with all kinds of messed up noises coming from the woods near our cabins. Twisted grunts, growls, and these piercing screeches that would make your blood run cold. The night before everything went crazy, I was having dinner with Old Man Hemlock and Maggie Sue when we heard this roar that seemed to shake the whole damn mountain. We jumped up from our chairs, staring at each other with pure terror in our eyes. "The beast," whispered Maggie Sue gravely. "We gotta do something," I exclaimed, as we cautiously went to the door to get a look at whatever was making that unholy sound. We stepped out into the freezing night. It was snowing like crazy, these big, fat flakes that made it hard to see. It felt like each step we took was gonna unleash hell itself on us, like whatever was hiding in those snowy woods was just waiting to pounce. But, you know how it is, that morbid curiosity, that need to see something terrible with your own eyes. Then, right there in the snow, between our tracks leading back into the vengeful woods, was a mangled deer carcass, its blood staining the snow a nasty red. The sight made me want to puke, but we were also stoked to have proof to support the crazy stories. The thing, whatever it was, knew we were coming. Even though we tried to be quiet, armed and stupidly brave, it was there, waiting for us. It was huge, twisted, like something out of a nightmare. It had these gleaming claws, and these eyes that just dripped with pure evil. Its breath came out in frosty puffs. My heart was pounding like a drum as Old Man Hemlock and Maggie Sue followed close behind, our breath fogging up the cold air. We were tripping over branches and crunching through the icy snow when another one of those gut-wrenching growls stopped us dead in our tracks. There it stood, right in front of us. It was like a messed-up mix of animal and human. Its fur was all matted with fresh blood, and those massive claws were stretched out in front of it, like it was ready to rip us to shreds. The thing's snarls were terrifying, and its eyes were filled with this rage that you could just feel. Looking at it, I knew we were screwed if we tried to fight it. We didn't have a clue how to fight this thing, and we sure as hell weren't ready to die. Old Man Hemlock grabbed my arm, his voice shaking. "We gotta get out of here now." I nodded hard, finally realizing that our stupid curiosity had led us down a one-way street to nowhere good. This wasn't the time to be a hero. It was time to run. We turned and ran back towards our cabins as fast as our legs could carry us, the creature's awful shrieks echoing through the woods behind us. Our hearts were pounding so hard, keeping time with our desperate running. Fear was like a whip, pushing us faster than we ever thought we could go. When we finally burst through the trees, I could barely breathe, let alone yell for help. But I yelled anyway, screaming at the top of my lungs for anyone to come and help us. Our neighbors came running out of their cabins, drawn by our desperate cries. They stared at us in disbelief as we gasped out our story. They agreed to help, and were just starting to form a search party to go after the thing when another blood-curdling roar ripped through the air. The group hesitated, but decided to go no matter what. I was too exhausted and terrified to go with them. I stayed behind with Old Man Hemlock and Maggie Sue, who were also in no shape to face that thing again. We waited by the fire for hours, scared out of our minds. Finally, the group came back, looking grim and covered in blood. They'd found the remains of more animals scattered around the forest, but they couldn't find the creature itself. Even though they didn't find it, the whole community was on high alert. We knew there was something out there, something unnatural and deadly. Armed guards started patrolling our cabins at night. We were all in this together, determined to deal with the threat as one. Soon enough, the damn thing showed itself again. Another earth-shattering roar echoed from the darkness as it tore through our once peaceful village. The guards fought bravely against that monster. They gave their lives for us, and when it was finally over, we mourned them while celebrating their sacrifice. We even built a little memorial for those who had died during that horrific time. We didn't know much about the enemy or where it had come from, but we knew one thing for sure. We couldn't let it keep terrorizing us. Days turned into weeks, and there were no more attacks. Every quiet night that passed, we felt a little more hopeful that our guards had scared the murderous thing away from our home. Slowly, people started to relax, but no one could look at those dark woods without a shiver running down their spine, remembering what had been hiding there. A part of each of us was forever changed. Every cold gust of wind, every distant howl in the night brought back the fear. But against the savage terror of the unknown in those dark forests, the strength and determination of the human spirit, our community, held strong. We had faced something truly awful, something unimaginable, and we had survived. And we swore, together, that we would never let our guard down again. It was September 2014. Me, Mark, and my buddies, Liam, Ben, and Chris, were camping deep in the Appalachian Mountains. We were miles away from the city, just us, the fresh air, and the promise of some killer adventures. We were huddled around our campfire one evening, just shooting the breeze. I said, grinning, why did the invisible man turn down a job offer? They all shrugged, waiting for the punchline, because he just couldn't see himself doing it. I burst out laughing, and they joined in, groaning at the corny joke. Little did we know, that was the last normal moment we'd have for a while. Our laughter was cut short by noises from the woods around us. It sounded like leaves rustling, some weird grunts, and other stuff we couldn't quite place. Ben tried to play it cool, saying it was probably just a deer or something looking for food. But it didn't sound like any animal we'd ever heard. And what was really freaky was that the noises happened like clockwork, right as it was getting dark and again before dawn. It wasn't random, it felt planned. Our curiosity, mixed with a healthy dose of fear, got the better of us. One evening, we decided to follow the sounds. We crept through the woods, each step making our hearts pound like crazy. The moon was hidden behind clouds, making everything pitch black. Every shadow seemed to move, and every snap of a twig sounded like a gunshot in the silence. Then, we saw it. Standing in a sliver of moonlight between the trees was this thing. It was like something out of a nightmare. It stood on two legs, kind of like a person, but it was covered in matted fur, and its face of God, it was messed up. It had these long, sharp claws on its hands, like it was made for tearing things apart. Before we could even process what we were looking at, the creature lunged at Chris. It happened so fast. 1 second he was there, and the next he was on the ground, screaming. The thing was on top of him, ripping at him with those claws. Blood was everywhere. I've seen some horror movies, but let me tell you, they didn't even come close to this. We were frozen in shock, watching our friend being torn apart. We should have done something, tried to help him, but we were paralyzed with fear. Besides, what could we do? Calling for help was useless. We were miles from anywhere, and no one would get there in time. Then something snapped. Survival mode kicked in. Me, Liam, and Ben turned and ran back towards our campsite as fast as we could. We didn't look back, not at first. We just ran, the sounds of Chris's screams and the creature's growls echoing behind us. We stumbled back into our camp, breathless and shaking. We were safe for now, but we knew that thing was still out there. It was like a horror movie, except it was real. What do we do? Ben asked, his voice trembling. He was on the verge of hysterics. We can't stay here. That thing will come back for us. I know, I said, tears streaming down my face. But we're too far out. We can't make it back to civilization tonight. The noises started again, closer this time. That was all the decision-making we needed. We knew we had to try to last the night and hope we could find help in the morning. We spent the next few hours fortifying our camp, using anything we could find, branches, rocks, our camping gear, to create some kind of barrier. We sharpened sticks into makeshift spears, knowing it wasn't much, but it was all we had. The noises continued all through the night. Heavy breathing, rustling just beyond our pathetic defenses. Every now and then, a growl or a snap of a branch would make us jump out of our skin. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I'm calling for help, I whispered. Liam and Ben nodded, their faces pale in the firelight. I pulled out my phone, praying for a signal. Miraculously, it connected. I explained everything to the operator, trying to stay calm and make sense. She told us help was on the way, but it would take time. Those were the longest hours of our lives. We were exhausted, terrified, and every sound made us flinch. Just when we thought we couldn't take it anymore, we heard it, the sound of engines and voices in the distance. A search party. They burst into our campsite, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. Relief washed over us in a giant wave. We were going to make it. They questioned us, asking about the creature, where it attacked Chris, anything that could help them. We told them everything, describing the thing, the matted fur, the claws, how it moved. We hoped they could stop it before it hurt anyone else. They led us out of the woods, and as we walked, we passed the spot where Chris. It was awful. I won't describe it, but it was a brutal reminder of what we had faced. Back home, our families were going crazy with worry. They were so relieved to see us. But we couldn't just forget what happened. We lost Chris, and we saw something that no one should ever have to see. Weeks turned into months. We tried to get back to normal, but then we heard the news. They never found the creature. The authorities investigated, followed some leads, but in the end, they said it was too dangerous to go after it. So, it's still out there, somewhere in those woods, waiting. We told ourselves that it was over, that we were safe. But deep down, we knew the truth. That night changed us. We'd never go back to those woods, not ever. And every now and then, when I'm alone and it's quiet, I can still hear those noises, still see that thing in my mind. We got away, but a part of me wonders if anyone else will who dares to enter those seemingly peaceful woods. And a part of me wonders if that really was the end of it all, or if there's something even worse waiting out there, hidden in the shadows. It was back in October 2011. I ended up signing up for this crazy, intense wilderness survival course way out in the Appalachian Mountains. You know me, always after the next challenge. I asked university, so I was always looking for something to push my limits. But let me tell you, nothing, and I mean nothing, could have prepared me for what went down. There were 6 of us, including our instructor, a guy named Mac, tough, ex-military type. We got to the campsite late afternoon, pretty standard stuff. We were all bonding, setting up tents, cooking dinner over the fire. Everyone was from different walks of life, so the conversation was actually pretty interesting. The next day, Mac was putting us through the ringer, teaching us all these emergency scenarios and survival skills. I was feeling pretty good, pretty pumped about my new skills. We were hiking that Sunday morning when Mac suddenly stopped us. He pointed to this weird-looking tree. The bark was all stripped off in parts, and there were these deep scratches all over the exposed wood. "Probably just a bear," Mac said, but he didn't sound too convinced. Ethan, this Wall Street guy, was staring at it like it was an alien artifact. "But why would a bear scratch it so evenly like that?" he asked, then shook his head, looking confused as hell. That comment stuck with me. It was unsettling. We kept going deeper into the woods, but that feeling of unease just wouldn't go away. That night, we were all around the campfire, swapping stories. You know, the usual camping stuff. The wind was howling like crazy, making these creepy sounds through the trees. The firelight was dancing on everyone's faces, and honestly, some of these stories were starting to freak me out a bit. Suddenly, we heard it, branches cracking in the darkness around us. We all shut up instantly. Mac turned off his flashlight, trying to be all tactical. I felt this cold sweat breaking out on my forehead. Whatever was out there was getting closer. We were all trying to breathe quietly, but it was no use. Chloe, this young nurse, she let out this terrified gasp. We were just frozen, waiting for whatever was in the darkness to show itself. And then there it was, maybe 20 yards away. This thing, it was like part human, part something else. It was hunched over on all fours, covered in this nasty, matted fur. Its eyes were glowing yellow, and it had these huge, razor-sharp teeth sticking out of this messed-up snout. Mac fumbled for his rifle, yelling, "Stay back, I got this." But his hands were shaking so bad. He could barely load the damn thing. I was thinking about my family back home, saying a silent prayer. I honestly thought I was going to die. Why didn't we call for help? Pride and stubbornness, I guess. We wanted to prove we could handle anything. We all instinctively took a few steps back as that thing snarled. It let out this insane, high-pitched scream that just cut through the air. I don't know what came over me, but I ran after Mac, but I tripped over a log like an idiot. I looked back, and that creature was right there, maybe 10 feet away, coming at me fast. "Help! Somebody please help me!" I screamed. I didn't know if anyone could even hear me over their own fear, but I had to try. The creature lunged, and just then, Mac fired his rifle. The gunshot echoed through the woods, and the thing stumbled, clearly hit. It let out this agonizing scream and looked at Mac with pure hatred. I saw my chance. I grabbed this thick branch from the ground, like some kind of caveman. "Everyone, run back to camp. Go." I yelled, firing another shot. The others hesitated for a second, then took off. I watched them go, hoping they could call for help. My phone was back at camp. We had left our phones, decided not to bring them deeper into the forest. Stupid, stupid, stupid. Now, all I could think was how desperately I needed to call for help. Mac kept firing, and the creature was staggering back with each shot. He was getting closer to it, and I just reacted. I swung that branch as hard as I could, and it connected with the creature's head with this sickening crack. It was dazed, hurt bad from the gunshots and my lucky hit. It stumbled away, disappearing back into the darkness. Mac and I didn't waste any time. We ran back to camp, grabbed our phones, and started making frantic calls for help. We knew we sounded crazy. No one was going to believe this. We tried to describe what happened, but it was impossible to make it sound even remotely believable. Eventually, we convinced them to come. They sent a search and rescue team, armed officers, even some wildlife experts. While we were waiting, we found the others, hiding all over the campsite. They were all shaking, completely traumatized. When the rescue teams got there, you could see the doubt all over their faces. They probably thought it was some elaborate hoax or mass hysteria. They searched for any sign of the creature, but the only thing they found was a trail of blood. It was like it had dragged itself away, maybe back into the deeper parts of the forest to recover. We finally got out of there, but we were all messed up. We tried to make sense of it, but what could we say? We had no idea what that thing was or why it attacked. The authorities, they clearly didn't believe us. They probably thought we were all nuts. Then, the worst part. We found out that one of our group, Olivia, never made it back to camp during the chaos. They searched for days, but nothing. We had to leave, had to accept it. It was the worst feeling in the world. I still think about that night all the time. What happened in those woods? Could we have done something different? I still see it all so clearly, from Ethan's comment at the beginning to Mac's actions, and my own desperate fight for survival. We lost Olivia to some unidentifiable creature, and sometimes I doubt myself, wondering if it was all real. But deep down, I know it was. Time has passed. We've all gone our separate ways trying to heal. We don't talk about it much anymore, but I know it's always there, burned into our memories. That night changed us forever. It changed how I see the world and how safe I feel. It's a reminder that there are things out there we can't explain, things that can shatter our reality in an instant. So, it was June 2021, and I, Danny Dandler, Miller web developer from sunny Santa Cruz, California, decided to do something crazy. I went on a solo trip to the Appalachian Mountains. Yeah, me, the guy who usually just hikes around local trails. Nature's always been my jam, my escape from the city's hustle and bustle, you know. I rolled into Glen Falls, North Carolina, late Friday afternoon. And let me tell you, as a self-proclaimed foodie, I hit up every single farm stand and general store on the way. Fresh local produce. Yes, please. After setting up my tiny tent at the nearest campsite, I figured, why not explore a bit? So, I headed deeper into the Appalachians. The air was thick with the smell of pine, leaves crunching under my feet. It was awesome. Then I stumbled upon this creepy, abandoned cabin in a clearing. Now, normally, a place like that would scream danger or horror movie, but I guess curiosity killed the cat, right? Just as I was about to reach for the doorknob, a raspy voice startled me. "He there." I jumped but relaxed a bit when I saw it was just another dude. "Hey, I said, still a little on edge. "Name's Carl. You might want to be careful around here. Folks say this place is haunted or something." He had this worry smile that kinda creeped me out. "Haunted, huh?" I chuckled, trying to shake off the unease. "Yeah, they say some weird animal, like things been seen prowling around." Carl leaned in closer, his grin widening. I raised an eyebrow, still skeptical but playing along. "Well, thanks for the heads up, Carl. I'll keep my eyes peeled." We chatted for a few more minutes, then went our separate ways. I continued my exploration, pushing the whole cursed cabin thing to the back of my mind. As the sun started to set, I figured it was time to head back to my campsite. But when I got there, man, it was a mess. My campsite was totally wrecked, and not like, someone tripped and knocked things over, wrecked. The tent was shredded, like something with claws had gone to town on it. My heart started racing. Carl's words about the cursed cabin came flooding back. I tried to stay calm, but I gotta admit, I was freaking out a little. It was dead silent all of a sudden, and that is when I remembered that creature. I gathered what little courage I had left, debating if I should try to salvage my camp or just book it back to civilization. But here's the kicker. We were deep in the mountains, and I had zero transportation. Fixing the campsite seemed like my only shot. It was pitch black by the time I managed to patch up my tent. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig, had me jumping out of my skin. I was on high alert, scanning the darkness for any sign of whatever had destroyed my camp. Trying to lighten the mood, yeah. Right? I dug through the remains of my supplies and found a bag of marshmallows that had somehow survived the chaos. Score. I whittled some sticks, started a fire, and tried to relax by roasting marshmallows, chuckling nervously between bites. Then, mid-bite, I heard a low, guttural growl. My blood ran cold. A shadowy figure emerged from the darkness, its eyes glowing red, locked on me. This thing was fast. It closed the distance in seconds, revealing its messed up features, long limbs, a mouth full of razor-sharp teeth. Pure nightmare fuel. Adrenaline surged through me. I tried to back away, but the creature let out another growl, its eyes narrowing, a predatory smirk on its lips. I knew I was screwed. This wasn't a fight I could win. My only chance was to run. I turned and bolted, my heart pounding like a drum. I prayed it wouldn't follow, but of course it did. This thing wasn't a dog or a bear or anything normal. It was something else entirely, and it was fast. I realized, to my horror, that only one other person knew I was here, deep in the woods. Carl. My legs were burning, but I pushed on, ignoring the branches whipping my face. The pain was nothing compared to what this thing would do if it caught me. I could hear it right behind me and glanced a cliff up ahead. Suddenly, I came to a cliff's edge, a dead end. I skidded to a stop, panting, and looked back at the monster. We stared at each other, both of us breathing hard. Then, an idea sparked. I grabbed a thick branch, gripping it like a weapon. As the creature lunged, I swung the branch with all my might. The unexpected attack stunned it for a second, and I took my chance. I sidestepped the beast and bolted past it. I could hear it snarling behind me, pissed that I'd gotten away. Nearly dead on my feet, I stumbled upon a ranger station, a beacon of hope in this messed up night. I burst through the door, gasping for breath, and told the rangers everything. They took me seriously, thank God. They searched the area for days, but they never found any evidence of the creature. Eventually, life went back to normal for me, but that night in the Appalachians changed me. I still go camping, still love the outdoors, but I'm always a little more cautious, a little more aware of the shadows. Because here's the thing, even though I made it out, even though nobody believed me, I know what I saw. And I know that out there, in the dark corners of the world, there are things we can't explain, things that are waiting for us, and sometimes, just sometimes, they find us. The unknown is always out there, you know. This was a harsh reminder of that. It was August 2022 when I decided I'd had enough of the city grind. I needed a break, some real peace and quiet, so I headed for the Appalachian Mountains. My name is Finn O'Malley, and yeah, like most folks stuck in a 9 to 5, I crave nature every now and then. I chuckled to myself, thinking about how many O'Malleys are running around. I picked a spot that wasn't exactly on every tourist map. Murphy's Forest Reserve, near a tiny village called Pine Hollow. This place was to have killer views and the occasional wild animal, nothing too crazy. Boy, was I in for a surprise. Sometimes, curiosity leads you down a path you never saw coming. Before I knew it, I was nestled comfortably in Murphy's Reserve, my campsite set up right next to a babbling creek. Now, I'm not one for ghost stories, but being out there, surrounded by nothing but nature, it does something to you. Makes you feel small, you know? It's humbling, and I got hooked fast. During my first week, I met some of the locals from Pine Hollow. They were good people, full of stories about the area's history, like the old moonshine parties they used to have, and crazy hunting trips. We're talking about stories that'll make your jaw drop. We laughed a lot, and they told me about their lives, the ups and downs. That's when I first heard about this thing, this creature they said lived deep in Murphy's Reserve. Something nobody had ever caught. Fast forward 2 weeks, and I'm hiking this winding trail near a place called Dead Man's Ridge. Yeah, I know, great name, right? And that's when I saw it. Something that shook me to my core. There were human remains, all wrapped up in this bloody tarp, next to an abandoned truck with out-of-state plates. It was horrifying, the way this person was. It wasn't just an animal attack. This was something way worse. The wounds, they weren't like anything I'd ever seen or heard of from around these parts. It hit me like a ton of bricks. This wasn't natural. Panicked, I booked it back to Pine Hollow as fast as my legs could carry me. I was freaking out. Should I call the cops? What do I do? Instead, I told the locals what I'd found, asked if anyone was missing. They just shrugged it off, like they already knew something was up. Within days, more weird stuff started happening. Trash cans overturned with these huge claw marks. Livestock torn up, like some kind of twisted surgery. And these howls, man, these howls at night, echoing across the mountainside. The folks in town started arming themselves. getting ready for a showdown with whatever this thing was. As the reports piled up, so did my curiosity. I couldn't explain it. I knew I should be scared, and I was, but I also had to know more. While I was staying in Pine Hollow, I got to be friends with this local guy, Caleb Jones. One night, during a blackout, he saw it. He described this monster straight out of a nightmare, with eyes like burning coals. He said it was at least 10 feet tall, covered in this matted fur that stank of death, with claws that could rip through anything. I didn't know if I should believe him 100%, but I told him about what I found near Dead Man's Ridge. We looked at each other, and we knew this thing had to be stopped. We got together with some other locals, armed ourselves to the teeth, and made a plan. We figured if we split into 2 teams, we could cover more ground. The first team was me, Caleb, and 3 other guys who knew the woods like the back of their hand. The second team was made up of some seasoned hunters and trackers from the community. We set out, hearts pounding, our mission crystal clear: get rid of this monster. Our team went deep into the forest, searching for any sign of this creature. At first, there was nothing, just some shredded plants and uprooted trees. But then we found it, a deer carcass, ripped apart with this terrifying precision. It was a gut punch, but we pressed on. The second team radioed in. They'd found similar stuff. This wasn't some isolated thing. We kept going for hours, and then we heard them. Those chilling howls, just like the ones I'd heard at Dead Man's Ridge. The radio crackled again. The second team had eyes on the creature near a clearing. We rushed over, adrenaline pumping. When we got there, the second team was shaken but okay. The creature had disappeared when they tried to confront it. We regrouped and moved towards where they'd last seen it. The air was thick with this awful smell, like rotting meat. 2 guys from our group decided to call for backup from Pine Hollow. This was way bigger than us. As the others went to call for help, we pushed on. And then, suddenly, there it was. This horrifying creature standing right in front of us. It was huge on 2 legs with these glowing, vicious eyes. It let out this growl, deep and guttural, that seemed to shake the whole forest. We froze for a second, and then all hell broke loose. Gunshots everywhere. But our bullets barely slowed it down. It lunged at one of our guys, its claws tearing into him like he was made of paper. He screamed, this awful, agonizing sound as we kept firing, trying to save him, trying to drive the thing off. He died right there, in the woods. I'll never forget the sound of him taking his last breath. The creature roared one last time, this deafening sound, before it disappeared back into the shadows. We were broken, wounded, but alive. We carried his body back to Pine Hollow. The town mourned, not just for him, but for their safety, their peace. After that, people searched for that monster, armed and ready. But it was gone. No trace. The people of Pine Hollow didn't forget, though. They made a small memorial near Dead Man's Ridge, a reminder of what they'd lost. Our friend will always be remembered as a hero, one of the many who stood up to the monster of Pine Hollow. We hoped the creature had moved on, that its reign of terror was over. But that feeling, that unease, it never really went away. The town slowly went back to their lives, but they were always watching, always ready for whatever might be lurking in the woods. April 2015. I remember it like it was yesterday. My 29th birthday was rolling around, and my buddies and I decided we needed a break from our humdrum lives. We hatched a plan to go on a hiking trip in the Appalachian Mountains. Me, Mark, I'm an accountant, and let me tell you, I was itching to get away from spreadsheets and deadlines. Our destination: Monongahela National Forest in West Virginia. The crew consisted of me, Ben, Sarah, and Old Man George. Ben, a software engineer, was the tech whiz of our group. Sarah, a history teacher with a thing for Appalachian history, was practically a walking encyclopedia about the area. And then there was George, a mountain of a man, always full of beans, with survival skills that made us feel a little safer in the wilderness. Our first day there, we were setting up camp near this picture-perfect creek. Everything was chill, you know. Birds chirping, the sound of the water. Then Sarah starts telling us these creepy stories about the mountains. She's going on about old coal mining disasters and spooky local legends. We all just laughed it off, figured she was trying to spook us city folk. Next morning we hit the trail, ready to conquer the wilderness. The scenery was breathtaking, but the hike was no joke. We're talking steep inclines and rocky paths. As we got deeper into the forest, this thick fog started rolling in, like something out of a horror movie. Visibility went to crap. Ben, always the photographer, spots something in the distance. "Yo, guys, check it out. Waterfall. Instagram gold." He yells over the roaring sound of the water. We were all in. We started making our way towards the sound of the water, and that's when Sarah let out a blood-curdling scream. "Mark, look." I froze. My mind couldn't even process what I was seeing. Bones. Human bones. All messed up and scattered around what looked like an old fire pit. The whole scene just felt wrong. "This can't be real," George muttered, his usual booming voice reduced to a whisper. We were all freaked out, but we decided to push on to the waterfall. Maybe it was morbid curiosity, or maybe we just needed to find some kind of logical explanation for what we just saw. We finally reached the waterfall, and it was even worse than the bones. Chained to a tree was a guy. But he was in bad shape, really bad. His flesh was shredded, you could see the bones underneath. Sarah, being the bravest of us, knelt down and checked him out. She shook her head slowly. "Guys, I think we just found a crime scene." I stammered, We gotta get out of here and find help." We started looking around, and that's when Ben found it, an old, abandoned mine entrance, hidden behind overgrown bushes and dirt. It was all rusty and falling apart, clearly hadn't been used in decades. This whole thing felt like we were stuck in some twisted game, and we were losing badly. We were all on edge, but Sarah and George convinced us to head back to camp before it got dark. That night was the longest night of my life. Every little sound in the woods made us jump. It felt like we were being watched. We were all huddled around the campfire, trying to eat, but nobody had an appetite. Ben, trying to lighten the mood, choked out, "Well, at least our lives are far from ordinary now, right?" We tried to laugh, but it was no use. Then Sarah gagged. She spit something out. It was a tooth. A human tooth, all bloody and gross. "That's it," I declared. Tomorrow morning, we're packing up and getting the hell out of here. We'll call the cops from town. Nobody argued. We tried to sleep, but it was impossible. Every shadow, every rustle of leaves, sounded like a monster creeping up on us. At the crack of dawn, we started packing, desperate to get out of there. And then, we saw it. This thing, it was huge on all fours, with a dead deer hanging out of its mouth. It looked like something out of a nightmare. Its arms were long and twisted, with these huge claws. And its mouth, it was stretched wide open, way bigger than it should have been. The deer's spine was snapped in half. Just when we thought it might disappear back into the woods, it turned its head. It saw us. Its eyes were blood red. It let out this ungodly snarl, and then it charged. Ben, in a moment of pure adrenaline, fueled panic, grabbed a fire poker and charged at the creature. I don't know what he was thinking. We all screamed at him in unison. Ben, no. Get back here. Thankfully, he stopped just as the thing pounced. He barely dodged its claws. That was our chance. I grabbed Sarah and George and we ran. We ran like hell. We could hear the thing crashing through the woods behind us, its growls getting closer. We were terrified. We stumbled into a clearing and saw an old, abandoned house. It looked like something out of a ghost story, but it was shelter. We ran inside and barricaded the door with anything we could find, an old table, some chairs, anything. The creature's roars started to fade. We thought maybe, just maybe, we had lost it. We were safe for the moment, but we were trapped. We were running low on food and water. Why didn't we call for help when we had the chance? Sarah cried, finally breaking down. We were so stupid, thinking it was just an old mine. George said, his voice full of regret. And now it's too late. We can't outrun that thing. We were all starting to lose it. The sun started to set, and the creature came back. It started circling the house, scratching at the walls. It was terrifying. Running was out of the question. Calling for help was impossible. We were deep in the woods, miles from anywhere. Then Ben, out of nowhere, came up with a plan. A crazy plan, but it was all we had. He was going to lure the creature away from the house, giving us a chance to escape to town. Don't worry about me, he said, seeing the look on our faces. Just go. We need help now. We argued, but he was determined. We begged him to be careful. Ben, armed with a torch, burst out of the house, yelling at the monster. The creature, completely focused on its new target, chased after Ben into the darkness. As soon as the creature was gone, we ran. We ran like we'd never run before. We ran until our lungs burned and our legs screamed. Finally, after hours of running, we made it to town, gasping for air, soaked in sweat. We found the police and told them everything. They didn't believe us at first, but we were so hysterical, so desperate that they finally listened. They sent out a search and rescue team, armed with tranquilizer guns, just in case. We waited for what felt like an eternity. Finally, they came back, and they had Ben. He was banged up, bruised, and exhausted, but he was alive. He had somehow managed to outrun and outsmart the creature long enough for the rescue team to find him, and we were safe. It was over. We were so relieved, so grateful to be alive. We never went back to those woods, not ever. Our story became a local legend. a warning to anyone who thought about exploring those dark, forgotten places. The old mine stayed abandoned, a silent testament to the horrors that lurked within. We were lucky to get out alive. Ben's bravery saved us, but none of us will ever forget the terror of those days, the blood-red eyes, the razor-sharp claws. It's a reminder of how close we came to becoming another grim statistic in the history of those haunted mountains. And let me tell you, not a single day goes by that I don't think about it. Not one. It was a warm June evening in 2023 when my life took an unexpected and terrifying turn. My name is Alex, and I've always loved the solitude of the Appalachian Mountains. I had a small cabin tucked away in a remote part of West Virginia, miles from civilization. It was my escape from the noise and chaos of city life. That particular weekend, I'd convinced two of my buddies, Ben and Chloe, to join me on a camping trip, along with Chloe's dog, a lovable mutt named Buddy. We all appreciated nature's beauty and the peace it offered. We spent our days hiking the scenic trails, fishing in the crystal clear streams, and sharing stories around the campfire at night. One afternoon, after a long hike, we stumbled upon a small cave entrance hidden behind some overgrown shrubs. Curiosity got the better of us, and we decided to explore. Chloe turned on her smartphone flashlight, illuminating the darkness inside. As we stepped carefully over the jagged rocks, Buddy suddenly let out a warning bark. He was staring at something in the corner of the cave. Our adrenaline spiked. We followed Buddy's gaze and then saw an ancient-looking symbol drawn on the cave wall in what looked like dried blood. The smell was awful, like spoiled meat left out in the sun. We exchanged uneasy glances. Ben tried to lighten the mood, saying, "Well, folks, isn't that just a piece of ancient art?" But we were all freaked out. I tried calling for help, but we were too far out in the wilderness. No cell service, no nothing. Later that night, around the campfire, every joke felt forced, like we were trying to ignore the tension that had settled over us since we found that cave. None of us wanted to admit it, but we felt like we had disturbed something evil. Sleep didn't come easy. We kept seeing that gruesome symbol in our minds. Just a few hours after dozing off, a loud crash jolted us awake. It sounded like shattering glass. We got dressed quickly and rushed out of the cabin. We found the source of the noise. It was Ben's car, parked not too far away. Every window had been smashed, the glass scattered everywhere. The hood was ripped open like a tin can, the engine mangled. Our hearts pounded in our chests. It was like a scene from a horror movie. How could anyone or anything do this out here in the middle of nowhere? We were staring at a reality far more terrifying than any nightmare. We were in shock, but we knew we had to get out of there, and fast. It was a horrible feeling, knowing we were completely cut off. Whatever did this to Ben's car, it wasn't human. No human could have done that kind of damage without tools, without weapons. It was like some kind of monster. As darkness fell on our last night, we were terrified. Every bone in our bodies ached with fear. It was the kind of fear that makes you freeze up, while your mind races, trying to make sense of it all. Buddy, who was usually fearless, was now cowering under a pile of leaves, trembling. He was staring at something in the woods, and that's when we saw it. It was a figure unlike anything we'd ever seen. It was huge and walked on two legs like a man, but it was covered in matted black fur. Its arms were long and muscular, and its teeth were sharp and jagged. Its claws dug into the ground as it moved. This thing was straight out of a nightmare. The monster lunged at us with a terrifying shriek that echoed through the mountains. We ran. We ran for our lives. We knew it was hopeless, that we couldn't outrun this thing, but we ran anyway. Fear was a powerful motivator. We were screaming, trying to escape, but the forest was so dense. The trees blurred together, and their roots seemed to reach out and trip us. We'd have called for help, but, no signal. And who would hear us out here anyway? We split up, hoping to confuse the creature. My lungs burned as I ran. I stumbled into a small clearing and hid behind a large boulder, just in time to see the beast charge past, chasing after Ben. I screamed at him. He was just a few feet ahead of that thing. It felt like the only way to save him was to sacrifice myself. My heart was hammering in my chest as I pushed myself up and ran towards the creature. It hesitated for a second, then lunged at me with a ferocious growl. And that's when I tripped. I fell hard on a protruding root. My sudden fall threw the creature off. It missed its target and stumbled. I scrambled up and ran, not knowing where I was going. Miraculously, I came across an old hunting cabin hidden in the trees. I didn't care who it belonged to. I just burst inside and slammed the door shut, securing it with a wooden beam. I was shaking, out of breath, and terrified, as I searched the cabin for anything I could use as a weapon. Night had fallen by the time I finally dared to go outside. I was running on pure adrenaline. I found Ben and Chloe huddled together behind a fallen log. They had somehow managed to outsmart the creature and escape. Though they were bruised and scratched, we knew we couldn't stay. We grabbed anything useful from the cabin and started walking, heading back towards civilization. The journey felt endless. We were constantly looking over our shoulders, terrified that the beast would find us again. Eventually, the trees started to thin out. We were getting closer to civilization, relieved, injured, but alive. We limped back into town and reported our experience to the authorities. We never saw the beast again, but it haunts us to this day. We couldn't forget about Buddy. He didn't make it. That's a pain that will always be with us. Time passed, and we slowly recovered, physically at least. But we were changed. We were so grateful to be alive, but we knew that something was out there, something evil, lurking in the wilderness. We heard whispers in town, rumors of grisly attacks in those same remote woods. It was a grim reminder. No matter how far we ran, that horrifying creature was still out there, somewhere, waiting for its next victims. And that's a thought that keeps you up at night. You just can't shake it, you know. Okay, here we go. I always figured laughing was the best medicine. As a comedian who wasn't exactly killing it, I used humor to brighten up my own days and hopefully those of the people around me too. So, when my cousin, Finn, and I decided to go camping for a weekend in the Appalachian Mountains back in April of 2009, I was stoked. Nature, some good jokes, and exploring with my cousin what's not to love. We picked Seneca Rocks in West Virginia. It looked awesome. All craggy mountain peaks and tons of green below these towering cliffs. Seriously, the perfect place to escape from the daily grind. The plan, or at least my plan, was to hike, chat, and just have a good time. We got to our campsite, super pumped. Setting up the tent in this cozy spot, surrounded by massive trees, we were just shooting the breeze, laughing, having a good time. By nighttime, we were beat from hiking up those killer trails. So we lit a fire, roasted some marshmallows, and just chilled. After scarfing down some s'mores, I started telling this dark joke about weird creatures hiding in the shadows of forests like this. We laughed about it, pretty ridiculous, right? But let me tell you, sleep came easy that night, even with our wild imaginations. The next day, we were up and at ready for more exploring. The sun was shining, with just a few gray clouds here and there, as we started another hike up these rocky slopes. At one point, we were on this narrow trail right next to this massive cliff, and Finn slipped on some loose gravel. He scraped his arm up pretty bad, but instead of freaking out, he cracked a joke about making it out alive one way or another. I gotta say, I admired his spirit, staying positive even when things got a little dicey. As it started getting dark again, Finn's arm started looking worse. It had this weird purple color around the edges, and he said it felt like it was on fire. We were worried, but we kept it cool. We figured cleaning it and bandaging it up with the first aid kit would be good enough for now, since we were heading home the next day. The sun went down, painting the sky all these crazy shades of orange and pink. We were settling in around our second campfire when I started noticing something weird. The vibe totally changed. It got super quiet, like all the rustling leaves and animal sounds just stopped. No explanation. Before we could even say anything about it, we heard this low growl coming from just outside our campsite. Seriously, it sent shivers down my spine. We hadn't seen or heard anyone else around the whole time, so this was totally unexpected. My eyes were darting all over the place, trying to see where the noise was coming from, and then I saw it. This shadowy figure, huge, crouching down in the bushes. I pointed it out to Finn, and we both just stared at it, a mix of being totally freaked out and morbidly curious. This thing had matted fur all over these muscular-looking limbs, but it was its face that really messed us up. It had this long snout, like a twisted, nightmare version of a dog's skull. And the smell, it was unholy, like something had died and come back to life. We could smell it so distinctly, as though our other senses were heightened, maybe as an instinctual response to being terrified. Finn figured running was a no-go, especially with his arm. Plus, trying to run in this secluded spot with some unknown monster lurking around. Not a smart move, he said, his voice shaking a little. That the best bet was to stick together until the thing left or until it was morning, whichever came first. But there was still the issue of his injured arm. We huddled around the fire, our backs against the cliff, and this creature just wouldn't leave. The growl got deeper, more menacing. It paced around the edge of the shadows, never really showing itself completely. Just these patches of matted fur in our peripheral vision. Every minute felt like an hour. This thing kept lurking, sometimes flashing these sharp, glistening teeth when it snarled. With Finnan's arm, we couldn't climb the cliff behind us, and trying to escape through the thick forest was out of the question. We started whispering about what to do next. I thought about yelling for help, but who knew if anyone would even hear us? Our shouts could be drowned out by the wind, or worse, it could just make the creature angrier. But then, when the beast suddenly lunged at us, I couldn't help but scream out of pure panic. Luckily, it got caught in this thick, thorny bush between us and it, and let out this yelp, backing off for a second. That's when we decided that yelling for help was our only shot. Risky. Yeah, but better than just waiting around to see if we'd survive the night. With Finn egging me on, I screamed into the night, hoping, praying someone would hear us. The creature seemed to flinch at the sound, but it didn't run away. We yelled for a few minutes, listening as hard as we could for any sign of a response. And then we heard it footsteps, far away but getting closer. Finally, another camper came out of his tent, looking all confused. "Help!" I yelled as he rubbed his eyes in a daze. "There's some kind of animal stalking us." The guy nodded, looking serious, and grabbed his hiking stick. "You two, get behind me," he said. "If that thing comes closer, I'll try to hold it off so we can get to safety." We moved through the forest, cautious but determined, just wanting to escape this nightmare. The creature followed us, its growls echoing through the night, but we didn't dare try to fight it. We just focused on getting to the other campers. Strength in numbers, right? We reached the main campsite and woke everyone up, explaining what was happening. One camper, this experienced hunter, came up with a plan to escape without trying to fight the creature. We stuck together, moving as one group, with the hunter leading the way, armed with his rifle. We moved quickly but quietly, trying not to provoke the thing. It kept stalking us, but with so many of us, it didn't attack. As it started getting light, we kept moving until we reached the park ranger's station. They called some wildlife expert and promised they'd investigate and make sure this thing wouldn't threaten anyone else. We were so relieved. It was like this huge weight had been lifted. We were lucky to get out of there mostly okay, except for Finn's arm. Going back to our normal lives, I couldn't help but think about how grateful I was for everyone who helped us. Their bravery saved our lives. No one ever really talked about what happened that night, or what that creature was, but we were all bonded by this shared experience, this understanding of how unpredictable and brutal nature could be. And me, I'm still cracking jokes, but let me tell you, I've got a whole new respect for the dark, quiet corners of the world. It all started back in 2019. That year was a total turning point in my life. I'm Ethan Hayes, and back then, I was just desperate for a change. My dead-end job and the constant buzz of the city were grinding me down. I needed out, and I needed it bad. That's when my coworker, Sarah, mentioned this hidden cabin, tucked away deep in the Appalachian Mountains. She said it was like stepping into another world, where time just kinda stopped. Sounded like heaven to me, the perfect escape from my soul-crushing routine. So, I went for it. I picked up the keys from this old guy, Mr. Henderson. at a gas station on the edge of nowhere. He gave me this weird look and joked. Last fella went up there came back with hair white as snow. I just laughed it off, thinking, yeah, right, old timer. I'm too grounded for ghost stories. Famous last words, huh? The drive was insane, all dirt roads and crazy narrow paths. But finally, I made it to the cabin. And you know what? Sarah was right. It was peaceful. Like ridiculously peaceful. About a week into my little retreat, I decided to go for a hike in the valley. Beautiful, right? Sun shining, birds chirping, the whole 9 yards. But then, as the hours ticked by, this uneasy feeling started creeping up on me. I couldn't shake it. Just as I decided to head back, it happened. This scream, like something straight out of a horror movie, ripped through the air. It was a woman's voice, but all messed up, like her vocal cords were being shredded. I froze, my blood turned to ice. In the middle of nowhere, this was the last thing I expected. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to run, to get the hell out of there. But another part of me, the stupidly heroic part, I guess, needed to know what was going on. So, against my better judgment, I followed the screams, and that's when I saw it. A campsite, but it looked like a bomb had gone off. Tents ripped to shreds, clothes scattered everywhere, and blood. A lot of blood smeared around with dirt and ashes, like some kind of sick ritual. I felt like I was going to throw up. I started backing away, trying to get out of there without making a sound, when I tripped. I fell hard, and when I looked down, I saw it, a severed leg. Just lying there, like it was no big deal. My heart was going crazy, hammering against my ribs like it was trying to escape. My first thought was to call the cops, but surprise, no signal. Not a single bar. I was on my own. But I couldn't just leave whoever was screaming like that. So, I did what any sane person wouldn't do. I crept closer, and then I saw the source of the screams. It was a creature, a monster, attacking a couple huddled under a fallen tree. It was huge, covered in fur, with these long, freaky limbs and claws that could slice you in half. It was tearing at them, ripping them apart. I was paralyzed. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. I just watched, hidden in the bushes, as this nightmare unfolded in front of me. Then, snap, I stepped on a branch. The sound was like a gunshot in the silence. The creature stopped what it was doing. It turned its head, slow and deliberate, and those eyes, those horrible yellow eyes, locked onto mine. I've never felt fear like that before. It was like every cell in my body was screaming at me to run. And that's exactly what I did. I scrambled up, turned tail, and ran for my life. I could hear it behind me, chasing me. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig, I was sure it was right on my heels. I ran like the devil himself was after me. By some miracle, as I rounded a bend, I started to pull away. Maybe this thing wasn't used to chasing things that could run that fast. But I didn't slow down. Not for a second. I burst out of the trees and sprinted towards the thicker part of the forest, my lungs burning, legs screaming. I was dodging trees, leaping over roots, running along the edges of cliffs where one wrong step meant certain death. But that thing, that monster, it just kept coming. Then, through the trees, I saw a sign for a ranger station. If anyone could help, it would be them. I veered off in that direction, my legs feeling like lead. I could hear it getting closer, its growls and roars echoing through the forest. I was exhausted, ready to collapse, but I couldn't stop. I just couldn't. Finally, I reached the ranger station. I pounded on the door, screaming for help. The door swung open, and there he was, a ranger, looking all official in his uniform. I didn't even wait for him to ask what was going on. I shoved past him, slammed the door shut, and locked it. We started piling stuff against the door, chairs, a desk, anything we could find. It was like a scene from a zombie movie. I finally stopped, gasping for air, and looked at the ranger. He looked terrified. "There's a thing," I stammered. "A monster. It's attacking people." The ranger's eyes widened. He grabbed his radio and started calling for backup, his voice shaky as he described what was happening. While we waited, we could hear it outside, howling and scratching at the door. It was the most terrifying sound I've ever heard. The ranger and I just stood there, frozen, not knowing if we were going to make it out alive. It was like time had stopped as we just sat there in that tiny room, scared out of our minds, wondering if the creature was going to break through. Then, finally, we heard sirens. Backup had arrived. The door burst open, and 2 officers, armed to the teeth, rushed in. The ranger quickly explained the situation, and they cautiously went outside, weapons drawn, to hunt down the creature. The noises outside stopped. The silence was almost worse than the howling. We waited, holding our breath, until the officers came back. They looked shaken, pale, but they told us the creature was dead. We exchanged a few words, but mostly we were all just in shock. The ranger and the officers had to deal with the aftermath, calling the authorities, figuring out what to do with everything. I just wanted to get out of there. I wandered away from the station, my mind reeling. It took me a while to process everything that had happened. Those images, that couple, the creature, they're burned into my brain. I never called for help during my escape. Fear took over. I just ran. I hope the rangers were able to identify the couple and let their families know. Give them some kind of closure. And yeah, I wish we could save them. I wish I could done something sooner. But at least that thing won't be hurting anyone else. The image of that creature, its fur, those long limbs, the claws, those yellow eyes. I know I'll never forget it. It's a reminder that there are things out there, in the wild, that we don't understand. But with time, maybe I can start to heal. I'll never forget what happened, but I have to keep moving forward. Just a little more cautiously next time I decide to go for a hike in the woods. A lot more cautiously. The crisp September air wrapped around me like a cold hug as I hiked through the Appalachian Mountains in Virginia. It was 2022, and it had been ages since my last real hike. I was itching for some outdoorsy time, away from the city's craziness. My name is Alex, and I've always loved a good hike. This trail was totally new to me. My buddy Mark wouldn't shut up about it for months, and just recently, he shot me an email detailing his whole experience. Mark raved about the insane views and the wild terrain of this place. As I got deeper into the woods, the sun started dipping down, throwing a warm, orangey glow over everything. Gradually, things started to get a little colder. A weird kind of chill, actually. I figured it was just part of hiking in a different part of Appalachia. When night fell, I set up camp by this little creek that seemed pretty chill and undisturbed. I built a fire to stay warm and chatted with some other hikers passing by. We swapped stories about our craziest adventures before hitting the hay. Later that night, I was jolted awake by this blood-curdling scream echoing through the forest. My heart was racing, and everyone in the campsite stumbled out of their tents, all dazed and confused. I mean, it's not crazy for animals to make noise at night, but this sounded eerily human. What the heck was that? One hiker asked, rubbing his eyes. Definitely not coyotes. Another chimed in, shivering a bit. It's one dude short of a barbershop quartered out here, another hiker joked, trying to lighten the mood. We all chuckled nervously, but deep down, we were seriously creeped out. We decided to stay on alert and went back to our tents, the screams still echoing in our heads. The next morning, we realized one of the hikers was gone. Total panic mode. We searched everywhere for him. After looking for hours, we found only his ripped up clothes way beyond what any animal could do. The vibe was super tense as we sat in our campsite, every little sound making us jump. Days turned into a week, and I stuck to my promise to myself, taking extra care when exploring the trail's unique spots. One afternoon, I stumbled upon this old, rusty shack hidden deep in the woods. It was off to the side of a barren clearing, hidden by overgrown trees and stuff. I was curious, since Mark never mentioned a shack in all our talks about his hike here. I carefully pushed the creaky door open with my foot. The hinges groaned like crazy. I stepped into what looked like an old living space, but it was clear nobody had been there in a long time. There was busted up furniture everywhere and broken glass crunching under my boots. I kept exploring, turned a corner, and stepped into a small room. There was rotting food and a stench so bad it burned my nose. That's when I saw something truly messed up. Scratch marks everywhere, with human teeth and fingernails stuck in the wood. Shocked, but also kind of fascinated, I tried to figure out how this horror show happened. Suddenly, this inhuman roar erupted nearby, freezing me in place like a deer in headlights. Sweat was dripping down my forehead, and all rational thought just vanished. This was no ordinary animal sound. It had an intensity that made my bones shake with terror. My heart was pounding like a drum. I bolted out of there as fast as I could, stumbling back onto the trail. The roar echoed behind me, getting closer. I scrambled over rocks and branches, my lungs burning, tears in my eyes. Whether it was fear or adrenaline, I decided not to yell for help. I had this gut feeling that doing so would just make things worse for everyone. I was running for my life, and I couldn't risk putting anyone else in danger or giving away my location. I fought the urge to look back, haunted by the roar of whatever was chasing me. My only goal was to survive. As I raced through the woods, I ran into Ben, who had noticed I was gone and came looking for me. I was terrified but so relieved to see him. We didn't even need to say anything. He saw the fear in my eyes. He started sprinting alongside me, understanding that we were in deep trouble. We ran like crazy, our legs aching out of breath. The creature's roars were relentless, getting closer, showing it was catching up. We darted through trees, pushing forward with no real plan except to escape. Up ahead, we recognized a part of the trail near our campsite. That gave us a bit of hope, but it faded quickly knowing that more people were now at risk. As we got close to the campsite, hoping that anyone there would have heard us and hidden, we suddenly saw the creature closing in. It was like nothing we'd ever seen before, a massive beast with matted fur, sharp claws, and drool dripping from its jagged teeth. Its eyes showed a mix of intelligence and pure rage. It charged at us, and we were breathless. Ben bravely pushed me behind him as the monster lunged at him, desperate to save him, but also stick to our decision not to involve others. I fought the urge to scream for help or get our friends who might be nearby. The creature clawed at Ben's arm, blood pouring from his wounds as he tried to fight it off. Somehow, he found the strength to kick the beast hard enough to stun it for a moment. We took the chance and kept running. It was clear we couldn't beat this thing. Injured and exhausted, we pushed on, making quick decisions to weave between trees and climb up rocky terrain to try and confuse our predator. After what felt like hours, we stumbled into a cave and squeezed into a narrow crevice. The creature's roars continued but seemed farther away this time. We hoped our efforts had worked, or at least bought us some time. Hiding in the shadows, hearts pounding, we patched up Ben's injuries with the little supplies I had. We were scared to make any sound that might give us away. We whispered about what just happened, grateful to have escaped. We swore to warn others about the deadly creature while also staying out of its way. As dawn started to break, the roars seemed even farther away. We figured it was safe enough for one of us to go out while the other recovered. Ben insisted that I go and get help while he stayed behind. I reluctantly agreed, promising to come back as fast as I could. The journey to the nearest ranger station was long and tough. When I finally got there, still running on adrenaline, I told our story to anyone who would listen, finding the shack, encountering the horrifying creature, and how it attacked Ben. Once help arrived at our hideout, they were relieved to find Ben alive, but still hurt. The rangers promised they'd do everything to find and identify the beast terrorizing the woods. But as news of what happened spread through nearby towns, it became clear that we needed answers. How had such an unknown creature evolved into a ruthless predator? The memory of the shack and its chilling secrets still haunted us. But those shocking events brought people together, uniting efforts to protect others from the dangers of the woods. Knowing we could never go back to our innocent hiking days after experiencing such terror, we moved forward, cautious but determined to find safety and understanding. Though the creature was never officially caught or identified, our story definitely saved countless others from the same terrible fate. Our tale served as a harrowing reminder, when venturing into the unknown, take nothing for granted and never underestimate the power of instinct.